Professor Minerva McGonagall could have left Privet Drive hours ago. She should have left, by any reasonable measure of duty and professional obligation. But reasonable measures had abandoned her sometime around noon, when she had watched Vernon Dursley kick his garden gate so hard the hinges bent, or because his 16-month-old nephew was crying. The tabby cat, perched on the wall, shifted slightly, green eyes never leaving the house at number 4. She had been there since dawn, watching and cataloguing, and growing sick with each passing hour. Vernon Dursley was a brute. There was no gentler word for it. She had watched him slam doors when baby Dudley cried, watched him shout at his wife for coddling the brat, watched him spend his evening glowering at the television while Petunia struggled alone with a screaming toddler. When Dudley had indeed kicked his mother all the way up the street that afternoon, screaming for sweets he was too young to safely eat, Vernon had laughed, as though cruelty were entertainment. Petunia was no better, cold where Vernon was hot, sharp where he was blunt, but equally poisonous. McGonagall had seen her yank Dudley's arm when he reached for a flower in the neighbour's garden, had heard her hiss, freaks, under her breath when Mrs. Figg mentioned her cat's behaving oddly. Most damning of all, she had watched Petunia burn a letter without reading it, a letter that had arrived by owl, a letter that could only have been from the magical world, reaching out in the aftermath of tragedy. The cat's tail lashed once, sharp and angry. These were the people Albus intended to give Harry Potter. These were the relatives who would raise the boy who lived. Over her dead body, the grandfather clock in the Dursley sitting room chimed 11:30. And, as if summoned by the sound, Albus Dumbledore appeared at the end of Privet Drive. Even in the darkness, his star-scattered robes and long silver beard made him unmistakable. McGonagall's heart clenched as she saw the second figure following behind. Hagrid, massive and unmistakable, carrying a bundle that could only be a child. Harry Potter. McGonagall leaped down from the wall and transformed before her paws touched the ground. Dumbledore looked unsurprised to see her, though his eyes did not hold their usual twinkle. "Minerva," he said quietly, "I wondered if you might be here." "I've been here all day," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury, "watching them." "Ah." Dumbledore approached slowly, Hagrid trailing behind with obvious reluctance. The half-giant's face was streaked with tears, and he clutched the blanket-wrapped bundle protectively against his chest. "And what did you observe?" "What I observed, Albus, is that these people are the worst sort of muggles imaginable." McGonagall's accent thickened with emotion, her Highland childhood creeping into her carefully cultivated English. "That man has a temper like a wild boar and the compassion of a brick. That woman," she gestured sharply toward number 4, "that woman burns letters from our world. Without reading them, she yanks her own child hard enough to leave fingerprints on his arm. They are cruel, petty, small-minded people, and you cannot possibly believe that leaving a 15-month-old child on their doorstep is anything resembling a good idea. Harry will be safe here," Dumbledore began. "Safe?" McGonagall's voice rose, and somewhere down the street a dog began barking. She forced herself to lower it, but the fury remained. "He'll be broken here, Albus. I've seen how they treat their own child. What do you think they'll do to Harry when they discover what he is?" Hagrid shifted uncomfortably, his beetle-black eyes bright with unshed tears. "Professor McGonagall's right, Professor Dumbledore. These don't seem like very nice people." "Nice is not the requirement," Dumbledore said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty that McGonagall had learned to distrust over the years. "Harry's mother died to save him, and in doing so, she created magic stronger than any spell I know. But that magic lives only while Harry is with his mother's blood. Petunia Dursley is Lily's sister. As long as Harry lives under her roof, Voldemort cannot touch him. McGonagall stared at him, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. You're using the boy as bait. I am ensuring his survival until he is old enough to… To what? The words cracked like a whip. To face Voldemort again. He's barely more than a baby. Albus. He's lost his parents, lost everything. And your solution is to abandon him with people who will make him pay for existing every day of his life. The protection. Hang the protection. McGonagall stepped forward, and, for the first time in 30 years of working together, she saw Albus Dumbledore take a step backward. That child needs love, not ancient magic. He needs safety, not strategy. He needs a family who will teach him that he matters for who he is, not what he represents. Dumbledore's blue eyes hardened. And you believe you can provide that? I know I can. The words left her mouth before she fully realized she meant them. But as soon as they were spoken, McGonagall felt the truth of them settle into her bones. Better than them. At any rate, Minerva, you cannot possibly… I can, and I will. McGonagall moved toward Hagrid, holding out her arms. Give him to me. Hagrid looked between McGonagall and Dumbledore, his face a picture of confusion and misery. I don't, Professor Dumbledore said. Professor Dumbledore is wrong. McGonagall kept her voice gentle for Hagrid's sake, but her eyes never left Dumbledore's face. Lily Potter's blood runs in my veins too. Albus. Not through birth, perhaps, but through magic, through the acceptance of magic, the love of learning, the choice to protect rather than destroy. That child needs someone who understands what he's lost and what he might become. These people will give him neither. The ancient protections will do him no good if he's too broken to use them when the time comes. McGonagall stepped closer to Hagrid, who was looking more conflicted by the moment. Please, Hagrid, you loved James and Lily. Would they want their son raised by people who will despise him? Hagrid's face crumpled. No, he whispered. No, they wouldn't. Hagrid, Dumbledore's voice carried a note of command. You will place the boy on the doorstep as instructed. But Hagrid was already lifting the bundle toward McGonagall, tears streaming down his face. I can't, Professor. I just can't. Not with people like that. McGonagall's hands closed around the blanket, and for the first time in 36 hours, Harry Potter was held by someone who had chosen to love him. He was smaller than she had expected, his face pale and pinched even in sleep. Dark hair stuck up at odd angles, and she could see the edge of the scar on his forehead, raw and red and terrible. Hello, little one, she whispered, and something in her chest that had been tight and angry for hours finally loosened. You're safe now. Minerva. Dumbledore's voice was sharp now, all pretense of gentle authority abandoned. You do not understand the consequences of this decision. I understand them perfectly. McGonagall looked up from Harry's sleeping face, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of 30 years as a professor and 46 years as a woman who had never backed down from a fight that mattered. I understand that this child has already sacrificed enough for your war. I understand that he deserves better than to be a pawn in your grand strategy. And I understand that if you try to take him from me, you will discover exactly how formidable a Transfiguration Master can be when someone threatens her family. The word hung in the air between them like a spell. Family. As if she had been planning this moment for years, instead of deciding it on instinct and fury. Dumbledore studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face for something. Doubt, perhaps, or hesitation. He found neither. "Very well," he said finally, and McGonagall heard defeat in the words. "But when Voldemort returns, and he will return, Minerva, this boy will need to be ready." "When that time comes," McGonagall said, adjusting Harry's blanket against the November chill, "he'll be ready because he's been loved, not because he's been broken. There's a difference, Albus, though I don't expect you to understand it." She turned on her heel and disapparated with a soft pop, taking Harry Potter away from Privet Drive and toward the stone castle that would become his home. Behind her, Albus Dumbledore stood alone in the lamplight, staring at the spot where his carefully laid plans had just vanished into the night. The Dursleys slept on, unaware that their nephew had been saved from a childhood that would have destroyed him before it began. In the morning, they would find only an empty doorstep and a fading echo of magic they would never understand. But Harry Potter was safe. Harry Potter was loved. And, in the end, McGonagall thought as she appeared in the familiar courtyard of Hogwarts with the sleeping child in her arms. That was the only magic that truly mattered. McGonagall appeared in the Hogwarts courtyard. With a soft pop, Harry's blanket-wrapped form clutched against her chest. The November night was bitter cold, and she felt the child shiver even in sleep. For the first time since apparating away from Privet Drive, the magnitude of what she had done began to sink in. She had no idea how to care for a 15-month-old child. The thought struck her with such force that she nearly laughed, if laughter hadn't felt so impossible in that moment. She could transfigure a pin into a pocket watch, could turn a classroom full of desks into pigs, and back again without breaking a sweat. But the sleeping toddler in her arms might as well have been an alien artifact for all she knew about his needs. "Well," she whispered to herself, her breath misting in the cold air, "you wanted him, Minerva. Now what?" Harry stirred against her shoulder, making this small sound that tugged at something deep in her chest. She needed to get him warm. She needed to get him fed. She needed to get him somewhere safe and quiet, and Winky is hearing apparition. McGonagall spun toward the voice and found herself face to face with a house elf, barely 3 feet tall, with enormous green eyes and a pillowcase toga that looked like it had seen better days. The elf's ears perked forward with curiosity as she took in the sight of McGonagall holding a human child. "Winky is being Professor McGonagall," the elf said, her voice high and excited. "Is Professor needing assistance? Winky is being very good with babies. Yes, she is." McGonagall stared at the elf, feeling relief wash over her so suddenly her knees nearly buckled. "Yes," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "Yes, I need assistance. This is Harry Potter, and he's going to be living here now." Winky's eyes went round as saucers. Harry Potter, the baby who defeated he who must not be named. She bounced on her toes, practically vibrating with excitement. "Oh, Professor McGonagall is being so wise to bring him home. Winky will help. Yes, she will. Winky knows all about babies and feeding and sleeping and crying. Oh, there is being so much crying sometimes." As if summoned by the word, Harry's eyes fluttered open. For a moment he simply blinked up at McGonagall in confusion, his green eyes, Lily's eyes she realized with a jolt, unfocused with sleep. Then, as awareness crept in, his face crumpled. The wail that erupted from his small body was unlike anything McGonagall had ever heard. It was the sound of a child who had lost everything, who was surrounded by strangers, who wanted his mother with the desperate intensity that only the very young could feel. It cut through her like a blade. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, bouncing him gently as she had seen other women do. "Shh, it's all right. You're safe." But Harry was inconsolable. His cries echoed off the stone walls of the courtyard, and McGonagall felt panic rise in her throat. What if she couldn't comfort him? What if she had made a terrible mistake? "Professor is needing to be taking him inside," Winky said, tugging at McGonagall's robes. "Winky will be preparing everything, cribs and bottles and soft things for sleeping." The elf disapparated with a crack, leaving McGonagall alone with a screaming child. McGonagall hurried through the castle corridors, murmuring constant reassurances that seemed to have no effect whatsoever. Students passing between common rooms stopped to stare, and she caught sight of several professors peering out of their offices with concern. But she pressed on, driven by an instinct she didn't fully understand, until she reached her private quarters on the first floor. She had barely gotten the door open when Winky reappeared with an armful of supplies that seemed far too large for her small frame to carry. "Winky is bringing everything," the elf announced proudly, setting down bottles and nappies and what appeared to be a miniature crib that immediately began expanding to full size. "Also milk that is being warmed just right, and soft blankets that smell like lavender for sleeping." McGonagall watched in amazement as her sitting room transformed around her. The sharp corners of her furniture rounded themselves into child-safe curves. Breakable objects lifted themselves to higher shelves. A thick, soft rug spread across the stone floor, and the fireplace grew a protective screen that would prevent small fingers from reaching the flames. "How did you, house elves, is being very good at baby magic," Winky said proudly. Winky's grandmother was teaching her when the old families was having many little ones. "Is Professor trying the bottle first? Babies is often crying for milk when they is being scared." McGonagall accepted the bottle gratefully and settled into her armchair, which had thoughtfully developed wider arms and a softer seat. Harry was still wailing, his face red and tear-streaked, but when she touched the bottle to his lips, he latched on immediately. The silence that followed was blissful. "There we are," McGonagall whispered, watching Harry's eyes flutter closed as he drank. "That's better, isn't it?" But even as he fed, she could see the tension in his small body, the way his free hand clutched at her robes as if afraid she might disappear. When the bottle was empty, and she moved to burp him, his eyes snapped open and he began crying again. Not the desperate wails from before, but a constant, heartbroken sobbing that was somehow worse. "He's grieving," she realized, the words coming out barely above a whisper. "Yes," Winky said softly, her usual exuberance replaced by gentle understanding. "Little ones is feeling loss very deeply, even when they is not understanding what is happening. He is missing his mama and papa." McGonagall felt her own eyes fill with tears. She had been so focused on rescuing Harry from the Dursleys that she hadn't fully considered what it meant for a child who had just lost his parents to be thrust into yet another strange environment with yet another stranger. "What do I do?" she asked, and was surprised to hear how lost she sounded. "Professor is holding him," Winky said simply, "is talking to him and singing to him, and letting him know he is being safe. Time is helping, but love is helping more." She walked the length of her quarters, then ventured into the corridors beyond, pacing the familiar halls of Hogwarts while Harry cried against her shoulder. She told him about the castle, about the moving staircases and the portraits and the ghosts who were perfectly friendly once you got used to them. She promised him that he would never be hungry or cold or alone. And when words failed her, she began to sing. The lullabies came from somewhere deep in her memory, songs her own mother had sung in the Highlands when McGonagall was small. "Mo grad, mo trid," she whispered into his dark hair. "Mo gale, na neonagan, my love, My heart, my darling among the daisies. Harry's sobs gradually subsided into hiccups, then into the deep, shuddering breaths of exhaustion. But he didn't sleep. He simply lay against her shoulder, one small fist tangled in her hair, as if afraid to let his guard down. McGonagall had no idea how long she had been walking when she heard footsteps on the corridor behind her. She turned to find Albus Dumbledore approaching, his face grave in the wandlight. Minerva. Albus. Her voice was hoarse from singing, and she felt Harry tense at the sound of the unfamiliar voice. I trust you understand that this cannot continue. McGonagall straightened, shifting Harry to a more protective position. This is exactly what will continue. The boy needs to be with his family. The boy needs to be with people who will love him. McGonagall's accent thickened with exhaustion and frustration. And since his parents are dead, and his relatives are monsters, that means he's with me. Dumbledore's blue eyes flashed with something that might have been anger. You are making a mistake that will have consequences far beyond what you can imagine. The only mistake would be giving him to people who will break his spirit before he's old enough to defend himself. McGonagall began walking again, partly to settle Harry, and partly because she couldn't bear to stand still under Dumbledore's disapproving gaze. He's just a baby, Albus. He's lost his parents, he's frightened, and he needs stability, not strategy. What he needs is someone who gives a damn about his welfare instead of his usefulness. The new voice came from the shadows ahead of them, and McGonagall looked up to see Severus Snape emerging from a side corridor. His black robes billowed around him, and his face was set in its usual sneer, but something in his posture suggested he had been listening for some time. Dumbledore's expression tightened. Severus, this does not concern you, doesn't it? Snape's dark eyes fixed on Harry, and McGonagall saw something flicker across his face. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. That's Potter's brat. His name is Harry, McGonagall said sharply. And he's not a brat. He's a child who's just lost his parents. Snape moved closer, and McGonagall found herself studying his face as he looked at Harry. He was young still, only 21, and despite his harsh words, she could see something almost gentle in the way he observed the sleeping child. He has her eyes, Snape said quietly, and there was something raw in his voice that made McGonagall's breath catch. You knew his mother. It wasn't a question, and Snape's jaw tightened as if she had struck him. I knew Lily Evans, before she became Lily Potter. Before she... He stopped, his hands clenching at his sides. Before she chose James Potter over you, McGonagall said, understanding flooding through her. Snape's smear returned full force. I see Potter's propaganda machine is working as efficiently as ever. This isn't about propaganda, Severus. McGonagall shifted Harry again, feeling him stir restlessly against her shoulder. This is about a child who needs protection. If you cared about his mother, then help me keep him safe. Safe from what? The Dark Lord is gone. Potter saw to that. Safe from being raised by people who will hate him for existing, McGonagall said quietly. Safe from growing up believing he's worthless. Safe from becoming another casualty of this war, even though the fighting is over. Snape was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between McGonagall and the child in her arms. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. What do you need? Magical protections, McGonagall said immediately. Ward stones, monitoring charms, anything that will keep him secure. And perhaps someone who understands what it's like to lose people you love. Snape's face went very still. Behind him, Dumbledore cleared his throat. This conversation has gone quite far enough. Severus, you will not. I will do as I see fit, Snape said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made Dumbledore stop mid-sentence. If Potter's child is to be raised at Hogwarts, he will need protections beyond what house elves and good intentions can provide. McGonagall felt something ease in her chest. "Thank you." Snape nodded curtly and melted back into the shadows, leaving McGonagall alone with Dumbledore and the sleeping child. "You are making enemies, Minerva," Dumbledore said softly. "Then so be it." McGonagall looked down at Harry, whose breathing had finally evened into true sleep. "Some things are worth making enemies for." She walked away from Dumbledore without another word, returning to her quarters as the first pale light of dawn began creeping through the castle windows. Harry had finally surrendered to exhaustion, his small body completely relaxed against her for the first time since she had taken him from Hagrid's arms. McGonagall settled into her chair, now permanently transformed to accommodate a sleeping child, and watched the sunrise paint the stone walls gold. In a few hours, the castle would wake. Students would emerge from their dormitories, professors would prepare for their classes, and the normal rhythm of Hogwarts would resume. But nothing would be normal again. She had a son now. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as Harry made a small sound in his sleep and burrowed deeper against her shoulder, McGonagall found herself smiling for the first time since Halloween night. "Mo Grad," she whispered into his hair. "Mo Triddy, you're home now." Hogwarts Castle settled into the peace of early morning, its newest and smallest resident finally safe in the arms of the woman who would raise him. July 31st, 1982, Harry's second birthday. McGonagall watched from across the room as 2-year-old Harry Potter sat in his high chair, systematically turning his mashed peas into tiny green mice. Each spoonful transformed the moment it touched his lips, and the mice scurried across his tray in neat little lines before vanishing in puffs of silver smoke. "Harry's sweetheart," she said gently, setting down her teacup. "Your food is for eating, not transfiguring." Harry looked up at her with those impossibly green eyes, Lily's eyes, and grinned, revealing 4 new teeth. "Mice Minnie," he announced proudly, clapping his hands. The remaining peas on his spoon promptly became a family of field mice that immediately began exploring the edges of his bowl. McGonagall felt tears prick at her eyes. Accidental magic at 2 years old was not unheard of, but this level of controlled transfiguration was extraordinary. More than that, it was joyful. Harry wasn't frightened by his magic or trying to hide it. He was playing with it, delighting in it, treating it as the most natural thing in the world. "Very clever, Mo Grad," she said, moving to clean up the mice, which dispersed obediently at her approach. "But perhaps we could try eating some carrots instead? They're much better for growing boys than magical rodents." Harry considered this seriously, then picked up a piece of carrot and bit into it without transformation. "Good?" he asked hopefully. "Very good." McGonagall kissed the top of his messy dark hair, breathing in the scent of innocence and magic that always seemed to surround him. "My brilliant boy." September 1983, age 3. The moving staircases of Hogwarts had developed what could only be called a protective instinct. McGonagall discovered this, quite by accident, when she lost sight of Harry during one of their daily walks through the castle. Panic had seized her throat as she imagined him tumbling down stone steps or getting trapped between shifting passages. But when she finally found him, he was sitting peacefully on the 4th-floor landing, chattering to a staircase that had frozen itself in position. "Stairs nice," Harry explained when she scooped him up, his small arms winding around her neck. "Stairs wait for Harry." McGonagall began to notice it everywhere. Staircases that refused to move when Harry was on them. Doors that opened without being pushed. Even the portraits seemed to watch him with unusual attentiveness. The castle itself had adopted Harry Potter. "It's remarkable," she told Dumbledore during one of their increasingly tense meetings. "I've never seen anything like it. It's as if Hogwarts recognizes him as family." Dumbledore's blue eyes were thoughtful behind his half-moon spectacles, perhaps because he is the only child to live here in over a century. "The castle has protective instincts of its own." "Or perhaps," McGonagall said carefully, "it recognizes that he belongs here, that this is his true home." Dumbledore said nothing, but she saw his fingers tighten around his teacup. October 1983. "Now, Harry, ye mustn't go too far into the forest," Hagrid said, his massive hand gently guiding 3-year-old Harry away from the darker paths. "There's creatures in there that aren't meant for little ones to meet." But Harry was completely absorbed in watching a group of bowtruckles play in an oak tree, his green eyes wide with wonder. "Stick people," he whispered, and McGonagall smiled at the perfect 3-year-old description. "Bowtruckles," Hagrid corrected gently. "They're tree guardians. Very shy they are, but they seem to like you well enough." Indeed, one of the bowtruckles had climbed down to Harry's eye level and was chittering at him in what sounded like actual conversation. Harry responded with a series of nonsense sounds that somehow seemed appropriate. "He has a gift," McGonagall murmured to Hagrid as they watched Harry's earnest communication with the magical creatures. "They trust him immediately." "Aye," Hagrid agreed, his beetle-black eyes soft. "Animals always know a kind heart. And that boy's got the kindest heart I've ever seen." McGonagall felt the familiar swell of pride and protectiveness that had become as natural as breathing. Harry would never lack for love, not while she drew breath. Not if she could help it. April 1984. Age 4. "Peeves!" Harry called out, his 4-year-old voice echoing through the corridor. "Where are you hiding?" Listening with amusement as the poltergeist materialized from the wall, with his usual dramatic flair, but notably without his customary cacophony of crashes and shrieks. "Little Potter," Peeves cried, but his voice was gentle, almost fond. Peeves was hiding in the armor, he was. Can the tiny Potter find Peeves again? It was extraordinary. Peeves, who had been the bane of students and staff for centuries, who delighted in chaos and mischief above all else, played hide-and-seek with Harry Potter with the patience of a nursery teacher. More than that, P actively protected the boy. McGonagall had seen Peeves divert other students away from corridors where Harry was playing, and once she'd witnessed the poltergeist catch a falling suit of armor that would have crushed the child. "Found you," Harry giggled, pointing at a tapestry that was suspiciously moving. "You're behind the dancing ladies." "Clever boy." Peeves emerged with genuine delight, performing a little bow that made Harry clap his hands. "Peeves will hide again. Count to 10. Do you know 10, little Potter?" 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, Harry recited proudly, covering his eyes with his hands but peeking through his fingers. McGonagall shook her head in wonder. Even the most chaotic force in Hogwarts had been charmed by her son. Summer 1984. The kitchen elves had taken it upon themselves to ensure Harry Potter learned to cook properly. "Young master, Harry is needing to know how to feed himself," Winky explained to McGonagall as she watched 4-year-old Harry standing on an enchanted stool, carefully stirring a pot of soup under the supervision of 6 house elves. "Is being very important life skill. Yes, it is." Harry was completely absorbed in his task, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration as he followed Dobby's instructions about stirring clockwise exactly 7 times before switching direction. His apron was several sizes too large and covered in flour, and he had never looked happier. "Mimi, look," he called when he spotted her. I'm making soup for dinner. I can see that, love, McGonagall said, her heart swelling as it always did when he smiled at her like that. It smells wonderful. Dobby is teaching young master the secret of good broth. Dobby squeaked proudly. Is all in the timing and the love. Yes, it is. Love makes everything better, Harry said seriously, and McGonagall had to turn away for a moment to compose herself. December 1984. Minnie, why do some books move and others don't? Harry asked, curled up against McGonagall's side as she read to him from a collection of wizard fairy tales. At 4.5, his questions had become increasingly complex, and she found herself challenged to explain magical concepts in terms a child could understand. Well, she said, adjusting the blanket around them both, some books are enchanted to help with learning. They move their pictures and words to make stories more interesting, like how you make the cats run across the blackboard. Exactly like that. McGonagall smiled, remembering how delighted Harry had been the first time she'd demonstrated animation magic in her quarters, creating a parade of cat silhouettes that chased each other across the walls. Could I make books move when I'm bigger? If you study hard and practice, yes, you could. Harry was quiet for a moment, then looked up at her with serious eyes. Will you teach me everything, all the magic things? McGonagall's throat tightened. Would you like me to? I want to learn everything you know, Minnie. I want to be just like you. January 1985. Severus Snape found 5-year-old Harry Potter at 7 o'clock in the morning, sitting cross-legged on the floor and carefully sorting a pile of scattered potion ingredients by color. Potter, Snape said, his voice carefully neutral, despite the way his heart had lurched at finding the child in his sanctuary. How did you get him here? Harry looked up, completely unafraid, despite Snape's notorious reputation among the older students. The door was open, he said matter-of-factly. These fell down. I'm putting them back. Snape looked at his ingredient cabinet, which showed clear signs of having been accidentally knocked over. The child had apparently been trying to return everything to its proper place. Do you know what these are? Snape asked, crouching down to Harry's level. Some of them, Harry said proudly. This is lavender. It smells like Minnie's soap. And these are beetle eyes, but they're icky. And this, he held up a jar of what looked like ordinary pebbles. I don't know this one. Bezoars, Snape said, surprised to find himself answering. They come from goats' stomachs. They can neutralize most poisons. Goats' stomachs. Harry wrinkled his nose, then brightened. That's silly, but useful, right? Because if someone got poisoned by accident, you could fix them. Yes, Snape said quietly. That's exactly right. They worked in companionable silence for several minutes, Snape finding himself oddly soothed by the child's presence. Harry was nothing like James Potter. There was no arrogance, no showing off, just genuine curiosity and a careful attention to detail that reminded him painfully of Lily. Professor Snape, Harry said when they had finished, why do people call you scary? You're just quiet. Snape felt something twist in his chest. People fear what they don't understand. That's sad, Harry said with the devastating honesty of childhood. You're not scary at all. You just know important things. Snape was explaining the basics of ingredient preservation to a 5-year-old son who was listening with rapt attention. July 31st, 1985. Harry's 5th birthday. McGonagall stood in the doorway of her sitting room, watching Harry sleep in the small bed they'd transfigured for him as he outgrew his crib. Tomorrow he would be 5 years old enough for formal magical education, old enough to begin understanding the wider world beyond Hogwarts' protective walls. But tonight he was still her little boy, curled up with the stuffed dragon Hagrid had given him and the picture book of Highland myths she'd brought from her own childhood. His dark hair stuck up at impossible angles, and his scar, that terrible mark of his early loss, was barely visible beneath his fringe. "You're worried?" Dumbledore's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him standing in her doorway, looking older than his 100-odd years. "I'm terrified," she corrected quietly. "He's so bright, Albus, so eager to learn and grow, and he's been sheltered here, surrounded by people who love him. What happens when he discovers what the world expects of him?" "What happens," Dumbledore said carefully, "is that you continue to love him and guide him, as you have done. But Minerva, he cannot stay hidden forever. The wizarding world believes him to be with his relatives. Eventually, questions will be asked. Let them ask. He's my son now, in every way that matters. I have the adoption papers to prove it. Legal documents will not protect him from his destiny. Then I will." McGonagall turned to face him fully, and her voice carried all the fierce protectiveness of a mother defending her child. "He's not a weapon, Albus. He's not a symbol or a tool or a sacrifice. He's Harry, my Harry, and I will not let you or anyone else use him." Dumbledore studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. But when the time comes, he'll be ready because he'll have been loved, not because he'll have been broken and rebuilt." McGonagall moved back to Harry's bedside, adjusting his blankets with gentle hands. "Good night, Albus." It was a dismissal, and they both knew it. When Dumbledore had gone, McGonagall settled into the chair beside Harry's bed. The same chair where she'd rocked him to sleep as a baby, where she'd read him stories, where she'd held him through nightmares and fevers and the ordinary sorrows of childhood. "Mograth," she whispered into the peaceful darkness, "tomorrow you turn 5, and the world will start expecting things from you. But tonight, you're just my little boy, dreaming safe dreams in your own bed." Harry stirred slightly, his hand reaching out in sleep, and McGonagall caught it gently, holding on tight. Outside the window, Hogwarts Castle stood sentinel in the moonlight, protecting its youngest resident as he grew from a grieving toddler into a beloved child, surrounded by magic and wonder and unconditional love. The boy who lived was becoming the boy who was cherished, and that, McGonagall thought as she watched him sleep, made all the difference in the world. July 31st, 1991. Harry's 11th birthday. The Great Hall had never looked more beautiful, and McGonagall had never felt more terrified. House elves had outdone themselves with the decorations. Floating candles spelled to burn in Harry's favorite colors of emerald and gold. Enchanted banners that shifted between scenes from his childhood at Hogwarts, and a cake that seemed determined to outdo itself with layers of chocolate and magic. The entire staff had gathered to celebrate, their faces warm with genuine affection for the boy who had grown up in their midst. But McGonagall could barely focus on the festivities. In her hands, she held a letter that would change everything. "Minnie?" Harry appeared at her elbow, his 11-year-old face bright with excitement. He had shot up over the past year, growing tall and lean like his father, though his eyes remained stubbornly, beautifully, like lilies. "Professor Flitwick says there's going to be fireworks after dinner. Real ones, not just the kind Uncle Hagrid makes that smell like cabbage." "Is that so?" McGonagall managed, slipping the letter into her robes. "Well, we mustn't keep everyone waiting then." But as they joined the celebration, she found herself memorizing everything. The way Harry laughed at Professor Sprout's joke. How he politely listened to Professor Binns's rambling birthday wishes. The genuine fondness in Snape's eyes as he presented Harry with a carefully brewed strengthening potion. These people had become Harry's family over the past 10 years. Tomorrow, she would have to tell him it wasn't enough anymore. The cake was spectacular. the presents thoughtful, and the fireworks everything Flitwick had promised. Harry fell asleep that night in McGonagall's sitting room, exhausted from excitement and sugar, curled up in what had once been his nursery chair and was now simply his chair by the fire. McGonagall waited until his breathing evened into sleep before she pulled out the letter. Mr. H. Potter McGonagall. The address read, in that familiar emerald green ink, Private Quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. A formality, of course. Harry had been living at Hogwarts since he was 15 months old, but seeing his name written out like that, seeing the official acknowledgement of what everyone already knew, that Harry Potter was ready to become a student, made her throat tight with emotion. "It's time," she whispered to the sleeping boy. "Mograd, it's time. August 1st, 1991. A Hogwarts letter." Harry examined the heavy parchment with curiosity rather than surprise. "But I already live at Hogwarts." "Yes," McGonagall said carefully, settling beside him at their small breakfast table. "But you've been living here as my son. Now you're old enough to live here as a student." Harry's brow furrowed in the way it always did when he was working through a complex problem. "What's the difference?" McGonagall's heart clenched. How did you explain to a child who had never known anything but love and acceptance that the world was full of people who would see him, not as Harry, but as a symbol? "Well," she began slowly, "students live in the dormitories with other children their age. They attend classes together, eat meals together in their house tables, play Quidditch together. Other children?" Harry's eyes widened. "You mean there are others like me, like you? Children who do magic and live with the professors and—" "Oh, sweetheart," McGonagall realized with a start. "No, no. Most magical children live with their parents until they're 11, then come to Hogwarts for school. You're rather unique in that regard." Harry considered this, unconsciously running his finger along the edge of his scar, a nervous habit he'd developed over the years. Why don't I live with my parents? The question she'd been dreading for 10 years, spoken with such innocent curiosity that it nearly broke her heart. "Because," McGonagall said gently, taking his hands in hers, "your parents died when you were a baby. They died protecting you." Harry went very still. "Died how?" "There was a very bad wizard named Voldemort," McGonagall began, choosing her words carefully. "He wanted to hurt people, to control the magical world through fear. Your parents fought against him, and when he came to your house that Halloween night, they died keeping you safe. But I lived. You lived." McGonagall touched his scar gently. "The magic your mother used to protect you was so powerful that it destroyed Voldemort instead. That's what gave you this scar, and that's why people know your name." Harry's hand flew to his forehead. "People know about this? About me?" "Oh, Harry." McGonagall pulled him into her arms, feeling him tremble. "The entire magical world knows about you. They call you the boy who lived. They've been waiting 11 years to see what you would become." "I don't want to be famous," Harry said, his voice small and muffled against her shoulder. "I just want to be your son." "You are my son," McGonagall said fiercely, holding him tighter. "You will always be my son, no matter what anyone else calls you. But, love, you're going to have to learn to be other things too. You're going to have to be a student, and probably a leader, and definitely yourself, in front of people who think they already know who you are." Harry pulled back to look at her, his green eyes serious beyond his years. "Will you still be my Minnie when I'm a student?" "Always," she promised. "Though I'll have to be Professor McGonagall when other students are around. Can you understand that?" Harry nodded slowly, then asked the question that cut deepest. "Will I still live with you?" McGonagall's throat closed. "Students live in their house dormitories. You'll be sorted into Gryffindor or Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff or Slytherin, and you'll share a room with boys your age. But what if I don't want to? Then we'll figure something out, McGonagall said, though she had no idea what. We always do. 1991. The boy has been coddled long enough. McGonagall looked up from her tea to find Dumbledore standing in her doorway, his expression more serious than she'd seen it in years. Harry was in the gardens with Hagrid, learning about the new batch of blast-ended Scroots, giving them privacy to have the conversation she'd been dreading. Harry has been loved, she corrected coldly. There's a difference. Indeed there is, Dumbledore said, moving to her fireplace without invitation. And that love has created a remarkable young man. But it has also created a young man who has never faced adversity, never learned to stand on his own, never been broken. McGonagall interrupted. Yes, I'm quite proud of that. Minerva. Dumbledore's voice carried warning. The prophecy says nothing about a broken child being more effective than a whole one. McGonagall set down her cup with deliberate care. In fact, I would argue the opposite. Harry is confident in his abilities, secure in his worth, and surrounded by people who would die for him. What more could you want in a weapon? He is not a weapon. Then stop trying to forge him into one. McGonagall stood, crossing to the window where she could see Harry laughing at something Hagrid had said. He'll face enough darkness in the years to come. Let him keep his light as long as possible. His integration into normal student life will be challenging enough without a mother who loves him, without a stable home to return to. McGonagall turned back to face Dumbledore, her eyes flashing. You want to use his adjustment difficulties to make him more malleable. I won't allow it. You cannot protect him forever, Minerva. Watch me. Their stare-in contest was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Harry appeared in the doorway, his face flushed from running, and stopped short when he saw Dumbledore. Oh, he said, suddenly formal in the way he'd learned to be around the headmaster. Sorry, Professor Dumbledore. Minnie, Hagrid says the Scroots are ready to. He stopped, noticing the tension in the room. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, love, McGonagall said quickly. Professor Dumbledore was just leaving. But Harry's attention had sharpened, and McGonagall saw him glance between her and Dumbledore with new understanding. You were talking about me, Harry, McGonagall began. You were talking about me like I wasn't here, like I was a thing to be decided about. Harry's voice was calm, but she could hear the hurt underneath. What don't you think I can handle? Dumbledore studied Harry for a long moment, and McGonagall saw calculation in those blue eyes that made her want to step between them. Your fame, Dumbledore said finally. The expectations that would be placed upon you. The weight of being Harry Potter instead of simply Harry. I didn't ask to be famous, Harry said quietly, but I'm not going to hide from it either. Minnie taught me better than that. McGonagall felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly brought tears to her eyes. Indeed, Dumbledore said softly. I believe she did. August 30th, 1991. Diagon Alley was a nightmare. McGonagall had prepared for curiosity, for stares, for whispered conversations. She had not prepared for the crowd that gathered the moment they stepped out of the leaky cauldron, or for the way people pressed forward with desperate hunger, as if touching Harry Potter might transfer some of his legendary luck. Professor McGonagall, a woman with elaborately curled hair, pushed through the crowd. Is it true? Is this really him? Oh, Mr. Potter, you're smaller than I expected. Mr. Potter. A wizard with a camera appeared from nowhere. Just one photograph for the prophet. The readers are dying to see. "Let me through! Let me through!" An elderly witch elbowed past a group of teenagers. "I knew your mother, dear boy. Lily Evans was in my shop every week before." Harry pressed closer to McGonagall's side, his face pale and overwhelmed. She put a protective arm around his shoulders and tried to navigate through the crowd. But more people kept appearing, drawn by the commotion. "Please," McGonagall said, raising her voice. "We're simply here for school shopping. If you could give us some space." Harry was trapped in a sea of strangers who all seemed to know intimate details about his life, who all wanted something from him he didn't understand how to give. "I want to go home," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. McGonagall's heart broke. Without hesitation, she drew her wand and cast a subtle notice-me-not charm around them both. The crowd's attention scattered, their eyes sliding away as if Harry had simply vanished. "Better?" she murmured. Harry nodded, taking deep breaths as the press of bodies moved away from them. "Is it always going to be like this?" "We'll find ways to manage it," McGonagall promised. "But yes, love, this is part of what it means to be you." They finished their shopping quickly, moving through the required stops with efficient professionalism. Books from Flourish and Blots, a cauldron from Pottages, robes from Madame Malkin's, where Harry stood very still and tried to pretend he didn't notice the whispered conversations about his measurements and colouring. Ollivander's was last, and the moment they stepped inside the narrow shop, McGonagall felt the weight of destiny settle around them like dust. "Ah," said the old wand-maker, appearing from the shadows with his pale, unsettling eyes fixed on Harry. "Harry Potter, I wondered when I would see you." Harry looked to McGonagall for guidance, and she nodded encouragingly. "I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter," Ollivander continued, circling them slowly. "It so happens that the phoenix whose tail feather is in your mother's wand gave another feather. Just one other. It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar." Harry's hand went instinctively to his forehead. "Its brother, yes," Ollivander said softly. "The wand that gave you that scar belonged to he who must not be named. 13.5 inches. You. Powerful wand. Very powerful. And in the wrong hands, well, if I had known what that wand was going out into the world to do." He shook his head and moved to his shelves, returning with a long box. "Holly and phoenix feather," he announced, opening the box to reveal a supple wand that seemed to glow in the wand light. 11 inches. Nice and flexible. The moment Harry's fingers closed around the handle, McGonagall felt magic sing through the air. The wand emitted a warm golden light, and she saw Harry's face transform with wonder and recognition. "Yes," Ollivander breathed. "Yes, I think we can expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. After all, he who must not be named did great things. Terrible, yes, but great. That's quite enough. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter," Ollivander continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "It's not always clear why, but I think it is clear that we can expect great things from you." Harry looked down at the wand in his hand, then up at McGonagall, with eyes full of questions she didn't know how to answer. "Come along, Harry," she said gently, placing payment on the counter. "We have a train to catch tomorrow." As they left the shop, Harry was quiet, turning his new wand over in his hands with careful reverence. "Minnie," he said finally. "Yes, love. What if I can't do them?" McGonagall stopped in the middle of Diagon Alley and knelt down so they were eye to eye, ignoring the crowd that flowed around them. "Then you do the best you can," she said simply. "You be kind and brave and true to yourself. You Remember that being great isn't about being famous or powerful. It's about choosing to do right, even when it's difficult, like you did when you took me home that night." "Like that," McGonagall agreed, her throat tight. "Exactly like that. Then I think I can do great things," Harry said with the quiet confidence that had defined him since childhood, "as long as you're there to remind me what they are." "Always," McGonagall promised, standing and taking his hand. "Always, Mograd." Tomorrow, Harry Potter would board the Hogwarts Express for the first time. He would be sorted into a house, make friends his own age, and begin the process of becoming not just McGonagall's son, but his own person. But tonight, he was still hers. Tonight, he was still the little boy who asked complex questions about transfiguration theory and called her Minnie when he thought no one was listening. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight, they would go home to Hogwarts, and she would read to him one more time, and he would fall asleep safe in the knowledge that he was loved, not for his fame or his power or his destiny, but simply for being Harry. It would have to be enough to carry them both through whatever came next. September 1st, 1991, Platform 9 3/4. McGonagall stood on Platform 9 3/4, watching the last-minute chaos of families saying goodbye, and tried not to think about the fact that she was about to put Harry on a train that would take him away from her for the first time in 10 years. "It's only a symbolic journey, you know," she told herself quietly. "He'll be back at the castle in a few hours." It was about the fact that when Harry stepped onto that train, he would stop being simply her son and become Harry Potter, the boy who lived, first-year student of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "Minnie." Harry appeared at her elbow, dragging his trunk behind him. He had insisted on packing it himself, though she had noticed him slip his favorite book, Highland Myths and Legends, into the very bottom, along with the small tartan blanket she had given him when he was 2. "Ready, love?" Harry looked up at her, and she saw her own anxiety reflected in his green eyes. "What if they don't like me?" "They'll love you," she said automatically, then caught herself. "But even if some of them don't, that doesn't change who you are. You're kind and clever and brave. The right people will see that. What if I'm too different?" McGonagall knelt down and cupped his face in her hands, ignoring the curious stares of nearby families. "Then you learn, you watch, and you listen, and you remember that everyone is trying to figure out how to belong. You're not as different as you think. Promise you'll still be my Minnie when I come home tonight." "Always," she whispered, kissing his forehead just above his scar. "Always, Mograd." She watched him board the train, her heart in her throat as he found an empty compartment, and pressed his face to the window to wave at her. When the Hogwarts Express finally pulled away from the platform, taking her son into his future, McGonagall had to grip the bench behind her to keep from chasing after it. The Hogwarts Express, Harry's compartment. Harry had been staring out the window at the Scottish countryside for nearly an hour when the compartment door slid open. A boy with flaming red hair and freckles poked his head in, looking hopeful and slightly nervous. "Mind if I sit here? Everywhere else is full." "Of course," Harry said, grateful for the company. "I'm Harry. Ron Weasley," the boy said, settling into the seat across from Harry and immediately pulling out what appeared to be a sandwich made of some kind of unidentifiable leftover. "Harry? What?" "Potter." Harry watched Ron's reaction carefully, braced for the usual excitement or awe. Ron's eyes went wide, but not in the way Harry expected. "Blimey, you're really him? The boy who lived?" "I suppose so. Yes, you don't look like the books say you should. And you don't sound famous." Harry blinked. "How should I sound famous?" "I don't know. More? Grand? My mum has this book about you, and it says you were raised by mysterious wizarding guardians and trained in advanced magic from birth. Ron studied Harry more closely. You look pretty normal to me. I was raised by Professor McGonagall, Harry said carefully, at Hogwarts. So I suppose the advanced magic part is true, but I'm not sure about mysterious. Cron nearly choked on his sandwich. McGonagall? The McGonagall? Bloody hell. Sorry, but she's terrifying. How are you not traumatized? She's not terrifying, Harry said, feeling defensive. She's wonderful. She sings Scottish lullabies and makes the best hot chocolate, and she taught me how to transfigure flowers into butterflies when I was sad about not having friends my age. Ron stared at him as if he had claimed McGonagall could fly. Are we talking about the same person? Tall, stern, turns into a cat. That's her. And you call her Mum, Harry said simply. Well, Minnie, when we're alone, she adopted me officially when I was 5. Ron's sandwich dropped onto his lap. McGonagall adopted you. McGonagall has a son, and that son is Harry Potter. He shook his head in amazement. Wait until I tell Fred and George. They'll never believe it. Before Harry could ask who Fred and George were, the compartment door slid open again. A girl with bushy brown hair and large front teeth appeared, looking harried. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one. No, sorry, Ron said. I'm Ron, by the way. Hermione Granger, the girl said briskly. Then her attention fixed on Harry. And you're Harry Potter. I've read all about you in The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts and Great Wizarding Events of the 20th Century. Have you really? Harry asked, fascinated despite himself. He had never met anyone who had read about him, since McGonagall had carefully avoided showing him most of the books written about his exploits. Oh yes, though I must say, the accounts are quite contradictory. Some say you were raised by muggles, others claim you were trained by a secret society of auras. Hermione studied him with the intensity of a scholar, but Ron said you were raised by Professor McGonagall. That's not in any of the books. Professor McGonagall thought it was better if people didn't know where I was, Harry explained, for safety. How fascinating. And what was it like, growing up at Hogwarts? Did you have access to the library? Have you been studying magic this whole time? Harry found himself smiling at her obvious excitement. Yes, to the library. I've read most of the 1st through 3rd year textbooks. Minnie, Professor McGonagall, started teaching me basic theory when I was 6. Hermione's eyes lit up. That's incredible. You must be years ahead in your studies. What's your favorite subject? Mine's transfiguration, though I haven't actually practiced it yet, obviously, since I only learned I was a witch when I got my Hogwarts meta, but I've memorized Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, and I'm terribly excited to breathe, Ron suggested, looking amused. Hermione flushed. Sorry, I get excited about learning. Don't apologize, Harry said quickly. I get excited about learning too. Minnie says curiosity is the most important quality a person can have. Professor McGonagall said that? Hermione looked as though someone had just validated her entire existence. She says lots of things like that. She's brilliant. And Harry realized he was going to spend a lot of time defending McGonagall's maternal qualities to people who only knew her as the stern transfiguration professor. So, Ron said eventually, what house do you think you'll be in? Everyone in my family's been in Gryffindor. I don't know, Harry said honestly. Mimi Professor McGonagall is head of Gryffindor, but she says the hat sorts based on who you are, not who raised you. I hope I'm in Though Ravenclaw would be nice too, for the learning opportunities. Just not Slytherin, Ron said darkly. My brothers say it's full of dark wizards. Harry frowned. Professor Snape is head of Slytherin, and he's not dark. Difficult, maybe, but not evil. You know Snape? Ron asked, incredulous. He tutored me in basic potions theory when I was little. He's actually quite kind when you get past the scowling. Both Ron and Hermione stared at him as if he had just claimed Hagrid was actually a pixie in disguise. Right, Ron said weakly. This is going to take some getting used to. The Great Hall, the sorting ceremony. The Great Hall looked exactly as it always had, but sitting at the small table with the other first years instead of at the high table made Harry feel like Alice down the rabbit hole. Everything was familiar, yet completely foreign. Professor McGonagall. And Harry had to remember to think of her that way now, not as Minnie, stood at the front of the hall with the sorting hat and the list of first-year names. She looked exactly as she always did during official school functions. Stern, dignified, and completely professional. Only Harry could see the tiny tension around her eyes. That meant she was worried. When I call your name, she announced, you will put on the hat and be sorted into your house. Harry watched as student after student was called forward. Boot, Terry went to Ravenclaw. Brown, Lavender became a Gryffindor. Bulstrode, Millicent joined Slytherin. Each time the hat seemed to make its decision quickly, sometimes before it had even settled on the student's head. Granger, Hermione. Hermione hurried forward, looking nervous but determined. The hat sat on her head for nearly 4 minutes. What Ron whispered was called a hat stall, before finally calling out, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted in cheers, and Harry found himself clapping enthusiastically. At least he would know someone in his house. Assuming he ended up there too. Longbottom, Neville, the round-faced boy who had lost his toad, practically trembled as he approached the stool. The hat took another long time with him, and Harry could see Neville's lips moving, as if he were having a conversation with it. Finally, Gryffindor rang out, and Neville stumbled toward the Gryffindor table, looking relieved. Malfoy, Draco, a pale boy with slicked-back blonde hair, walked confidently to the stool. The hat had barely touched his head before it shouted, Slytherin! Potter was coming up soon in the alphabet, and Harry felt his heart start to race. What if the hat couldn't decide what to do with him? What if it put him somewhere unexpected? Potter, Harry, completely, utterly silent. Even the ghosts stopped their conversation to stare as Harry walked toward the stool, on unsteady legs. He could feel hundreds of eyes follow in his every step, and the weight of expectation was suffocating. Professor McGonagall's expression remained professionally neutral, but when Harry met her eyes for just a moment, he saw encouragement and love there. The hat settled over his head, blocking out the staring faces, and immediately Harry heard a voice in his mind. Well, well, Harry Potter, or should I say, Harry Potter McGonagall. Does it matter? Harry thought back. Oh, it matters very much indeed. You're not at all what I expected, young Potter. Where most children your age are driven by simple desires. Friendship, acceptance, the fear of rejection. You carry the weight of adult concerns. Responsibility, protection of others. A deep, abiding loyalty that runs far deeper than blood. I just want to make Minnie proud. Minnie? The hat's mental voice sounded amused. Yes, I see. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. You have courage, certainly. It takes courage to love without reservation when you've lost so much. You have intelligence and a thirst for learning that would serve you well in Ravenclaw. You are fiercely loyal, which Hufflepuff would treasure. And you have the ambition to protect what matters to you at any cost, which Slytherin would appreciate. Then where do I belong? That, my dear boy, is the question, isn't it? You are not who you might have been had you been raised elsewhere. But perhaps that means you are exactly who you were meant to be. Tell me, where do you want to be? Wherever I can do the most good, wherever I can be myself and still help people. Ah, the hat's voice was warm with approval. Yes, I think I see now. You've been raised by a Gryffindor, and you've learned what true courage means. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. Not rushing headlong into danger, but standing firm when others would flee. Gryffindor. The great hall erupted in noise as Harry walked to the Gryffindor table on shaking legs. The twins Ron had mentioned, Fred and George apparently, were whooping and chanting, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" while the rest of the house clapped and cheered. Harry slumped into a seat between Hermione and Ron, overwhelmed by the noise and attention. Across the hall, he caught McGonagall's eye and saw her tiny, proud smile before she returned to her professional expression. Weasley, Ron. Ron was sorted quickly into Gryffindor, completing their little group. As he sat down next to Harry, grinning widely, Harry felt the first stirrings of what might eventually become belonging. But when the feast began and conversation flowed around him, Harry found himself glancing repeatedly toward the high table, where McGonagall sat with the other professors. She was close enough to see, but farther away than she had ever been in his life. Later Gryffindor Tower. "This is it then," said Percy Weasley, gesturing toward the Gryffindor common room. "First years, your dormitories are through that door and up the stairs. Boys to the left, girls to the right." Harry followed Ron and the other first-year boys up a narrow spiral staircase to a circular room lined with four-poster beds. His trunk had been placed at the foot of the bed by the window, and someone had thoughtfully left a warming charm on the sheets. "This is brilliant," Ron said, bouncing on his bed. "I've always shared with my brothers. It'll be nice to have a bit of space." Harry sat on his own bed and looked around the dormitory. It was cozy and warm, with tapestries on the walls and a fire crackling in the small fireplace. The other boys, Neville, Seamus Finnegan, and Dean Thomas, were chatting excitedly about their first day. It should have felt like an adventure. It should have felt like belonging. Instead, Harry felt utterly alone. He had never slept anywhere but McGonagall's quarters. He had never gone to sleep without her voice wishing him good night, without the familiar sound of her moving about in the next room, without the knowledge that if he had a nightmare or felt sick or simply needed comfort, she was there. "You all right, Harry?" Neville asked quietly. "You look a bit peaky." "Just tired," Harry said, managing a smile. "It's been a long day." But as the other boys prepared for bed, chattering about Quidditch and classes and their families back home, Harry felt panic begin to build in his chest. The room felt too small and too large at the same time. The beds were too close to strangers and too far from everything familiar. He waited until he was sure the others were asleep before he slipped out of bed, grabbed his dressing gown, and crept out of the dormitory. 2 a.m. Hogwarts corridors. McGonagall found him on the 4th floor, sitting on the steps of a staircase that had frozen itself in place for him, just as the staircases always had when he was little. He was wearing his dressing gown over his pajamas, his hair sticking up at impossible angles, and he looked exactly like the frightened child she had carried away from Privet Drive 10 years ago. "Harry." He looked up at her with relief so profound it nearly brought her to her knees. "I couldn't sleep," he said simply. "Oh, sweetheart." McGonagall sat down beside him on the stone steps, her professional robes billowing around them both. "What's wrong?" "I don't know how to be there," he said, his voice small and lost. I don't know how to sleep in a room with other people. I don't know how to be Harry Potter instead of just Harry. I don't know how to be away from you." McGonagall felt her heart break and mend at the same time. "It's your first night. It's supposed to be difficult. The other boys seem fine. The other boys have been away from their parents before. They've had sleepovers with friends, visited relatives, gone to summer camps." McGonagall reached out and smoothed his hair, the gesture as automatic as breathing. "You've never been away from home before. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not brave enough to be a proper Gryffindor?" "Oh, Mo Graft," McGonagall said softly. "Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. You got on that train today, even though you were terrified. You sat through the sorting, even though everyone was staring. You tried to sleep in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by strangers. That's courage." Harry leaned against her shoulder, and she wrapped her arm around him instinctively. "Can I come home tonight?" he asked quietly. "Just for tonight." Every maternal instinct screamed at her to say yes, to take him back to their quarters, and tuck him into his own bed, and pretend this day had never happened. But she knew that would only make tomorrow harder. "How about a compromise?" she said instead. "You come have tea with me, and we'll talk about a way to make this work for both of us." 20 minutes later, Harry was curled up in his chair by the fire in McGonagall's sitting room, holding a mug of hot chocolate and looking more like himself than he had all day. "I think," McGonagall said carefully, "that we need to establish some new routines." Harry looked up hopefully. "You're a Gryffindor student now, which means you sleep in Gryffindor Tower, but there's no rule that says you can't visit me in the evenings, or have breakfast here on weekends, or simply come by when you need to remember that you're still my son." "Really?" "Really. Professor Dumbledore may have opinions about the arrangement, but I adopted you legally, Harry. You're not just my student, you're my child. That doesn't change because you've started classes." Harry set down his mug and moved to hug her, burying his face in her shoulder. "I was so scared I wouldn't be allowed to see you anymore, except in Transfiguration class." "Never," McGonagall said firmly, holding him tight. "You're stuck with me, love, for better or worse." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire crackle and listening to the familiar sounds of the castle settling around them. "Minnie," Harry said eventually. "Yes, thank you for letting me be scared." McGonagall kissed the top of his head, breathing in the scent that had been home to her for 10 years. "Thank you for being brave anyway." When she walked him back to Gryffindor Tower, an hour later, Harry seemed steadier, more centered. He hugged her goodnight at the portrait hole and promised to try sleeping in the dormitory again. "And if you can't?" she asked. "Then I'll try again tomorrow," he said with a small smile. "And if I can't then, I'll come find you and we'll figure something else out." "That's my boy," McGonagall said proudly. "Sweet dreams, Mo Grad." As she walked back to her quarters, McGonagall reflected that this was going to be more complicated than she had anticipated. Harry was going to have to learn to be a student, to make friends, to navigate the complex social dynamics of adolescence. But he was also going to remain her son, with all the comfort and security that relationship provided. It was going to require delicate balance, careful boundaries, and probably more late-night conversations than either of them expected. But they would figure it out. They always did. After all, they were family. October 15th, 1991, Gryffindor Common Room. "You've never played Exploding Snap?" Ron asked, staring at Harry as if he had just admitted to never breathing. "No," Harry said, watching with fascination as Ron shuffled the deck with practiced ease. Minnie always preferred chess or reading. She said card games were He stopped, realizing he was about to quote something McGonagall had said about gambling being beneath a proper Highland family. She said what? Hermione looked up from her charms essay, quill poised in midair. Nothing important. Harry felt heat creep up his neck. Even after 6 weeks of living in Gryffindor Tower, he still found himself censoring the comfortable intimacy of his relationship with McGonagall, just that she preferred other games. Right, Ron said slowly. Well, prepare to have your mind blown. As the cards began their explosive dance across the common room table, Harry found himself marveling at how different this was from the quiet evenings he had shared with McGonagall. There was laughter and chaos, and the constant threat of singed eyebrows. It was wonderful and overwhelming and completely alien. My mum loves exploding snap, Ron continued, dealing out cards that occasionally let off small pops. She and Dad play every Sunday after dinner. Usually ends with someone's hair smoking and Mum laughing so hard she snorts. Harry tried to imagine McGonagall snorting with laughter over a card game, and failed completely. What does your mum do when she's not teaching? Ron asked casually. I mean, Professor McGonagall. Does she knit? Garden? My mum's always doing something with her hands. She reads, mostly, Harry said, discarding a card that promptly exploded in a shower of purple sparks. And she writes letters to her family in Scotland. Sometimes she plays piano. Professor McGonagall plays piano. Hermione's eyes lit up with the hunger for new information. That's not in any of the faculty biographies I've read. She's very good, Harry said proudly. She taught me when I was little, but I wasn't much good at sitting still long enough to learn properly. Ron and Hermione exchanged one of their looks, the kind that said they were still figuring out how to process the reality of Harry's unusual upbringing. Does she tuck you in at night? Ron asked awkwardly. Harry felt his cheeks burn. Sometimes, when I have nightmares, or if I'm sick. He looked up defiantly. Is that strange? No, Hermione said quickly. No, it's sweet. It's just, we're still getting used to the idea of Professor McGonagall as a mother, instead of just the scary transfiguration teacher. She's not scary, Harry said automatically, then caught himself. Well, she is to students who don't do their homework. But she's never been scary to me. Harry thought about it seriously. When I was 7, I transfigured all the suits of armor in the castle to dance a Highland reel. It took her 3 hours to undo it, and she missed dinner with the other professors. He grinned at the memory. She was more exasperated than angry, but she made me write lines about respecting other people's time. You turned the armor into dancers when you were 7. Hermione's voice was faint. That's NEWT-level transfiguration. I had a good teacher, Harry said simply. October 20th, 1991. Library. McGonagall found them there during her evening rounds, huddled around a table, covered in books and parchment. Harry was helping Ron with his transfiguration essay, while Hermione researched something in what appeared to be a legal text. Good evening, she said, approaching their table. I hope you're not planning to be here much longer. It's nearly curfew. Just finishing up, Professor, Harry said, but his voice carried the warmth it always held when he spoke to her. Ron's having trouble with the theory behind mouse-to-snuffbox transformation. The wand movement is the key, McGonagall told Ron, who looked terrified to be receiving direct instruction from her. Sharp flick, not a wave. The magic must be precise, not gentle. She demonstrated with her wand, and Ron nodded frantically, scribbling notes. Professor McGonagall, Hermione said suddenly, I've been researching the legal precedents for magical adoption, and I found something quite interesting. Oh? According to Wizengamot records, there was a formal adoption filed in 1986. Harry Potter McGonagall, ward of Minerva McGonagall. Hermione looked between Harry and McGonagall with undisguised curiosity. But there's no public record of it. Most people still think Harry was raised by his Muggle relatives. That was intentional, McGonagall said, carefully. For Harry's protection. But legally, you're his mother, Hermione continued. Not his guardian, not his teacher. His mother. Ron looked stunned. Bloody hell. Sorry, Professor, but that means Harry's actually a McGonagall. Language, Mr. Weasley, McGonagall said automatically. But her eyes were on Harry, who was staring down at his parchment with pink cheeks. It's just a legal formality, Harry mumbled. No, McGonagall said firmly. It's not. She reached out and touched his shoulder gently, a gesture so naturally maternal that Ron and Hermione both blinked in surprise. You are my son in every way that matters, Harry. The papers just made it official. Your son, Ron repeated slowly, as if testing the words. So when you're stern with him in class. I'm being his professor, McGonagall said simply. Just as I would with any student. The fact that I'm also his mother doesn't change the standards I expect him to meet. That must be difficult, Hermione said softly. Separating the two roles. McGonagall's expression softened slightly. Some days more than others. October 31st, 1991. Halloween. Harry had been dreading this day for weeks. Every year since he could remember, October 31st had been a quiet day of remembrance in McGonagall's quarters. She would tell him stories about his parents, show him the few photographs she had managed to collect, and they would light candles in the window. One for James, one for Lily, and one for the future they should have had. But this year, Harry was expected to join the Halloween feast in the Great Hall, to participate in the celebration and festivities. The idea of eating pumpkin pasties and laughing at the decorations while commemorating the anniversary of his parents' murder felt wrong. You seem quiet today, Hermione observed as they walked to Charms class. Are you all right? Yes, and there's going to be a wonderful feast tonight. The older students say the decorations are spectacular. Ron, who had been listening, suddenly went very still. Oh, he said quietly. Oh, Harry, I'm sorry. I forgot. Forgot what? Hermione looked between them in confusion. His parents, Ron said gently. They died on Halloween, 10 years ago today. Hermione's face went white. Oh, Harry, I'm so sorry. How thoughtless of me. It's all right, Harry said, though it wasn't really. Most people don't remember the date. It's usually a quiet day for Minnie and me. We light candles and remember them together. Hermione asked. I don't know. I'm supposed to be at the feast. Hang the feast, Ron said fiercely. Family is more important than pumpkin juice and chocolate tarts. Harry felt something warm bloom in his chest at Ron's words. The idea that his friends would understand, would support him in missing the celebration, hadn't occurred to him. Professor McGonagall probably expects you to come to her quarters after the feast anyway, Hermione said practically. She wouldn't want you to be alone on a day like this. Halloween night, McGonagall's quarters, asterisk. I was wondering when you'd appear, McGonagall said as Harry knocked on her door at 8 o'clock. How was the feast? I left early, Harry admitted, settling into his chair by the fire. Ron and Hermione understood. They said family was more important than pudding. McGonagall's expression softened. They're good friends. The best, Harry agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the fire crackle. On the mantelpiece, 3 candles waited to be lit. Tell me about them, Harry said softly. About Mum and Dad. McGonagall smiled, reaching for the matches. Your father was insufferable when he first arrived at Hogwarts. Arrogant, show-offy, absolutely convinced he was Merlin's gift to Quidditch. She lit the first candle, but he grew up. By 7th year, he had become the kind of man who would die protecting his family, without hesitation. The second candle flared to life. Your mother was the brightest witch of her age, brilliant mind, fierce heart, and the most beautiful laugh I've ever heard. McGonagall's voice grew soft with memory. She could have been anything she wanted. Healer, researcher, politician. Instead, she chose to be a mother and a warrior. She fought for what was right, and she loved you more than her own life. Harry watched the candlelight flicker against the window. Do you think they'd be proud of me? Oh, Morgrat, McGonagall said, moving to kneel beside his chair. They would be so proud they'd burst with it. You're kind and brave and thoughtful. You stand up for your friends, and you work hard in your studies. You're everything they hoped you would become. Even though I'm not with their relatives, even though I call you Mum instead of remembering them. Loving me doesn't diminish your love for them. Having more than one mother doesn't make any of us less important. Your parents wanted you to be safe and loved and happy. The fact that you found that with me would only make them grateful. Harry leaned into her touch, feeling the familiar comfort of being understood completely. I love you, Mum, he whispered. McGonagall's breath caught. It was the first time he had called her that directly, without hesitation or self-consciousness. I love you too, my darling boy, she whispered back, more than you could ever know. They were interrupted by frantic knocking on the door. McGonagall opened it to find Percy Weasley, pale-faced and trembling. Professor McGonagall, there's a troll in the dungeons. Professor Dumbledore sent me to get you. Hermione Granger is missing. And Harry Potter, he spotted Harry by the fireplace. Oh, you're here. A troll? McGonagall's mind immediately went to tactics, but her heart went to her son's safety. Harry, you stay here. Don't leave these rooms. But Hermione will be found by the professors. You are not going anywhere near a mountain troll. But even as she spoke, McGonagall could see the stubborn set of Harry's jaw that meant he had already made his decision. Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. 10 minutes later. McGonagall arrived at the bathroom to find chaos. The troll lay unconscious on the floor, its own club beside its head. Ron stood frozen by the sinks, his wand shaking in his hand. Hermione was pressed against the far wall, tears streaming down her face. And Harry was standing in the middle of it all, perfectly calm, his wand pointed at the troll's head. Harry James Potter, McGonagall, she said, her voice deadly quiet. What did you do? The troll was going to hurt Hermione, Harry said simply. So I stopped it. How? I remembered what you taught me about leverage and force distribution. The troll was top-heavy, so I transfigured the floor around its feet into a sheet of ice. When it slipped, I used a banishing charm to redirect its own club into its head. Harry looked up at her with earnest green eyes. It was just applied physics, really. McGonagall stared at her son, caught between terror at what could have happened and overwhelming pride at what had actually happened. That was NEWT-level tactical magic, she said weakly. You taught me well. That was bloody brilliant. 1 minute the troll was about to smash Hermione, and the next minute Harry was directing it like a puppet master. Language, Mr. Weasley, McGonagall said automatically, but her heart wasn't in the correction. She was too busy processing the fact that her 11-year-old son had just single-handedly defeated a mountain troll, using strategy instead of brute force. Are you in trouble? Hermione asked Harry quietly. McGonagall looked at her son, really looked at him. He wasn't boasting or showing off. He wasn't seeking praise or attention. He had seen someone in danger and acted to protect them, using the skills she had taught him and the principles she had instilled in him. "No," she said finally. "He's not in trouble." November 10th, 1991. Quidditch pitch. McGonagall had never been so terrified in her life. She stood in the professor's box, watching her son zoom around the Quidditch pitch on a borrowed Nimbus 2000, and tried not to have a heart attack. 60 feet in the air, on a stick, chasing a ball with wings. "He's a natural," Professor Flitwick said admiringly as Harry executed a perfect Wronski feint. "Youngest seeker in a century." "He's going to give me grey hair," McGonagall muttered, gripping the railing so hard her knuckles were white. "Minerva," Dumbledore said gently from beside her. "He's perfectly safe. Madame Hooch has put every protective charm she knows on that pitch." "Protective charms won't help if he falls 60 feet onto his head," McGonagall snapped, never taking her eyes off Harry's flying form. On the pitch, Harry was clearly enjoying himself. He moved with the same natural grace he showed in Transfiguration, as if the broom were simply an extension of his own body. When he finally caught the golden snitch, ending Gryffindor's victory over Slytherin, McGonagall had to sit down before her legs gave out. "You're proud of him," Dumbledore observed. "I'm terrified of him," McGonagall corrected. "There's a difference." But as Harry landed safely and was immediately surrounded by cheering teammates, she had to admit that Dumbledore was right. She was proud and terrified in equal measure. November 15th, 1991. Gryffindor Common Room. "Your mum looked like she was going to faint during the match," Ron told Harry as they sprawled by the fire, still glowing from Gryffindor's victory. "I thought she was going to hex Professor Snape when he started muttering during your dive for the snitch." "She worries," Harry said fondly. "She's never liked heights." "It must be strange," Hermione said thoughtfully, "having your mother as a teacher, knowing she's watching you all the time, worried about you." Harry considered this. "It's not strange for me. It's just normal. But I suppose it might seem odd from the outside." Ron asked, "You know, parents who don't work where you go to school, who don't know all your teachers." "No," Harry said without hesitation. "I can't imagine having anyone else as a mum. She's perfect. Even when she assigns you extra homework," Hermione teased. "Especially then. It means she knows I can do better." Ron shook his head in amazement. "Your mental mate, in the best possible way." They were interrupted by McGonagall herself, appearing through the portrait hole with a small wrapped package. "Harry, could I speak with you for a moment?" Harry followed her to a quiet corner of the common room, away from curious ears. "I brought you something," she said, handing him the package, "for your first Quidditch victory." Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden snitch, its wings moving slowly in endless loops. When Harry touched it, it warmed under his fingers and made a soft, humming sound. "It was your father's," McGonagall said quietly. "I found it in his old things. Lily sent it to me after they went into hiding, along with some other personal items she wanted kept safe." Harry's throat tightened. "Dad's?" "He carved it himself in 7th year during his last Quidditch season. I thought you should have it." Harry looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Mum, even after all this time." Hearing him call her that still made her heart swell. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "Not just for the Quidditch, but for everything. For how you've adapted to school, for the friendships you've made, for the young man you're becoming." "I had a good teacher," Harry said, echoing his earlier words to Ron and Hermione. As they hugged goodnight, McGonagall reflected that this was what she had hoped for when she took Harry from Privet Drive 10 years ago. Not just safety, not just survival, but this, a child who was loved and confident and surrounded by friends who knew his worth and could face challenges with courage and strategy. Watching Harry return to his friends, showing them the wooden snitch and explaining its history, McGonagall felt the deep satisfaction of a job well done. Her son was thriving, and that made every difficult moment, every complicated balance between mother and professor, every terrifying Quidditch match worth it. From across the common room, Harry caught her eye and smiled. The same brilliant smile that had captured her heart when he was 15 months old and had never let it go. Yes, McGonagall thought as she made her way back to her quarters. He was definitely thriving. December 10th, 1991. McGonagall's quarters. Mum, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise not to get angry. McGonagall looked up from the essays she was grading to find Harry standing in her doorway, still in his Quidditch robes and looking troubled. The request immediately put her on alert. In her experience, conversations that began with promises not to get angry usually provided excellent reasons for fury. What happened? She asked, setting down her quill. Harry closed the door behind him and settled into his chair by the fire, his movements careful in the way that meant he was choosing his words deliberately. Ron, Hermione, and I went to the third-floor corridor tonight. McGonagall's blood went cold. The Forbidden Corridor? Harry, that area is off-limits for a reason. I know, Harry said quickly. And we weren't planning to go there, but Malfoy was saying something about Hagrid having an illegal dragon, and we followed him to see what he was talking about. And we ended up hiding from Filch. And he took a breath. There's a three-headed dog up there, Mum, guarding something. A three-headed dog, McGonagall repeated carefully. Hagrid called it Fluffy. And it's standing on a trapdoor that's obviously hiding something important. Harry leaned forward, his green eyes serious. You taught me to think before acting, Mum. Something's not right about this whole situation. McGonagall felt her world tilt slightly. In canon, though of course she didn't know about any canon. Harry would have kept this discovery secret, would have embarked on his own investigation with his friends. But her Harry, the Harry she had raised, came to her immediately with his concerns. What do you mean something's not right? Why would Hogwarts have a three-headed dog in a corridor that students could accidentally access? Why announce that the corridor is forbidden without explaining the danger? It's like Harry paused, clearly working through his thoughts. It's like someone wanted curious students to find it. McGonagall's heart sank as she realized her son had identified exactly what had been nagging at her subconscious for months. And there's something else, Harry continued. Professor Quirrell has been asking a lot of questions about advanced protective charms in defense class. Not the kind of thing that's useful for first years, but exactly the kind of thing you'd need to know if you were trying to get past magical defenses. Harry, McGonagall said slowly, what exactly are you suggesting? I think someone's hidden something in this castle that they want stolen, Harry said simply. And I think they're using students, using me as the intended thieves. McGonagall stared at her son, feeling pride and terror in equal measure. Pride that he had learned to think strategically, to see through manipulation. Terror that he was absolutely right. Stay here, she said, rising from her chair. Don't leave these rooms. To have a conversation with Professor Dumbledore. December 10th, 1991. Dumbledore's office. Minerva, Dumbledore said as she swept into his office without knocking. How unexpected. Please, Sit down. I'll stand. Thank you. McGonagall faced him across his desk, her jaw set in lines he had learned to recognize as dangerous. We need to discuss the Philosopher's Stone. Dumbledore's hand stilled on the lemon drop he had been unwrapping. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't. The word cracked like a whip. Don't you dare pretend ignorance with me, Albus. Not about this. The stone is perfectly safe. The stone is being used as bait, McGonagall said flatly. Bait to lure Voldemort's agent into attempting theft, with my son as the intended hero to stop them. Dumbledore studied her for a long moment, then sighed. How did you know? Because my son is not an idiot, and neither am I. McGonagall's voice was deadly quiet. A three-headed dog in a corridor students could access. Protections that are challenging but solvable by first years. A defense teacher who's been asking suspiciously specific questions. Did you think no one would notice the pattern? But protections are not designed for first years. Aren't they? McGonagall leaned forward. Harry spent this evening analyzing them with me. Fluffy can be bypassed with music. Any first year could figure that out from Hagrid's drunken ramblings. The Devil's Snare requires basic herbology knowledge. The flying keys need Quidditch skills. The chess set is exactly the kind of problem Ron Weasley excels at solving. Severus's logic puzzle is the sort of thing Hermione Granger would find in a children's book. Dumbledore's expression grew grave. You've investigated the protections. My son told me about a dangerous situation. So, I assessed the threat. McGonagall's accent was thickening with rage. What I found was a carefully constructed gauntlet designed to test the exact skills Harry's friend group possesses. Did you honestly think I wouldn't see through such obvious manipulation? Harry will need to face Voldemort eventually, Dumbledore said quietly. It is his destiny, better, that he should start with smaller challenges. He is 11 years old. Albus, McGonagall's voice rose. 11. You are talking about deliberately putting an 11-year-old child in mortal danger to satisfy your strategic vision. The greater good. Don't you dare invoke the greater good to justify child endangerment. McGonagall's eyes blazed. I won't have it. I won't let you use my son as a weapon in your war games. Dumbledore rose from his chair, his own composure finally cracking. You cannot protect him from his fate forever, Minerva. Watch me. December 15th, 1991. McGonagall's quarters. You were right. McGonagall told Harry that evening as they shared tea by the fire about the protections being designed for students. I've examined them all. Harry looked up from his Transfiguration textbook. All of them? Fluffy can be subdued with music. Professor Sprout's Devil's Snare responds to basic light and fire spells. Professor Flitwick's winged keys require flying skills. The chess set is magically programmed to accept substitution of human players. Professor Snape's logic puzzle is designed to be solvable by anyone with basic reasoning skills. McGonagall set down her teacup with deliberate care. And Professor Quirrell's final protection. Well, that remains to be seen. So I was right. Someone wanted students to be able to get through. Yes. McGonagall met his eyes directly. And that someone was Professor Dumbledore. Harry absorbed this information with the same thoughtful calm he had shown since childhood when confronted with adult failures. He wants me to face whatever's down there. He believes you need to face challenges to prepare for your future. McGonagall said carefully. I disagree with his methods. What do you think I should do? The question hung between them, weighted with trust and consequence. McGonagall realized this was the moment she had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. The moment when Harry asked her to choose between protecting him and preparing him. "I think," she said slowly, "that we should be very careful, very smart, and very ready." Christmas morning asterisks. Christmas morning found Harry surrounded by wrapping paper and friends in the Gryffindor common room, laughing at Ron's amazement over his new wizard's chess set and Hermione's delight in the advanced arithmancy texts her parents had sent. McGonagall watched from the doorway, her heart full as she observed her son experiencing normal childhood Christmas joy for the first time. The pile of gifts around him included offerings from every Weasley family member, a collection of rare books from Hermione, and even an awkward but thoughtful gift from Neville. "Professor McGonagall," Hermione called, spotting her. "Look what my parents sent. Numerology and grammatical principles. It's supposed to be brilliant for understanding the mathematical foundations of magic." "An excellent choice," McGonagall agreed, settling into a chair near the fire. "I believe you'll find Chapter 7 particularly enlightening." "Harry got something really mysterious," Ron added, pointing to a package wrapped in silver paper. "No note or anything." McGonagall's attention sharpened as Harry carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a cloak that seemed to shimmer like liquid silver. "It's an invisibility cloak," Harry breathed, lifting the fabric to watch light bend around his hand. A real one. A note fluttered to the floor, and Harry picked it up to read aloud. "Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well." McGonagall's throat tightened. She recognized the handwriting, recognized the careful non-identification. Only Dumbledore would be cryptic enough to return a family heirloom without signing his name. "That's incredible," Hermione said, reaching out to touch the cloak. "I've read about these. They're incredibly rare. Most cloaks lose their power over time, but this one feels like it's been enchanted for centuries." "Can I try it?" Ron asked eagerly, as the children passed the cloak around, marveling at its properties. McGonagall felt a chill of foreboding. An invisibility cloak given to Harry just when the protections around the stone were becoming more relevant. Another tool in Dumbledore's careful orchestration. "Harry," she said quietly, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" "That cloak belonged to your father," she said softly. "It's been in your family for generations. Did you know Professor Dumbledore had it?" "I suspected." McGonagall chose her words carefully. "Harry, I want you to be very careful with that cloak, and I want you to promise me that if you decide to use it for anything more adventurous than avoiding Filch, you'll tell me first." Harry studied her face, reading the concern there. "This is about the stone, isn't it? You think he gave it to me because he expects me to use it to investigate?" "I think Professor Dumbledore gives very few gifts without purpose," McGonagall said diplomatically. "Then I'll make you the same promise I made about the third-floor corridor," Harry said firmly. "Nothing happens without you knowing about it." January 15th, 1992. Hogwarts corridors. 2 a.m. Asterisk. McGonagall found Harry crouched behind a statue on the third floor. The invisibility cloak pooled around his feet and his wand held at the ready. "And what?" she whispered, settling beside him. "Are we watching for?" "Quirrell's been coming up here every few nights," Harry whispered back. "He talks to himself, or to someone, outside Fluffy's door. And tonight his voice sounded different, angrier. As, if summoned by their conversation, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Professor Quirrell appeared, moving with none of his usual nervous fumbling. His walk was purposeful, predatory. "Master will not be pleased if I fail again," they heard him mutter as he approached the forbidden door. "Potter boy suspects nothing. Soon we will have the stone, and Master will return." McGonagall's blood went cold. Beside her, Harry tensed. He's working for Voldemort, Harry breathed, so quietly it was barely a sound. They watched as Quirrell entered the corridor, heard the faint sound of a harp beginning to play. He's got past Fluffy, McGonagall whispered. We need to alert the other professors, and then go after him. Harry finished. Together. He was calm, focused, strategic. Not the reckless boy who might charge in alone, but the careful thinker she had raised. Together, she agreed. January 15th, 1992. Outside Dumbledore's office. The password is Sherbet Lemon, McGonagall told Harry as they approached the stone gargoyle. Professor, Dumbledore needs to know about Professor Quirrell immediately. But when they reached Dumbledore's office, they found it empty. A note on the desk, in Dumbledore's careful handwriting, explained that he had been called away to the ministry on urgent business. How convenient, McGonagall said grimly. Harry stared at the note. He's not coming back tonight, is he? This was planned. It appears so. Then it's up to us. Harry looked up at her with determination that was heartbreakingly mature. We can't let Quirrell get the stone. If Voldemort comes back. If Voldemort comes back, it won't be because we failed to act, McGonagall said firmly. But Harry, what we're about to do, it's dangerous. More dangerous than the troll. More dangerous than anything you've faced before. I know. Harry's voice was steady. But you taught me that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing what's right anyway. McGonagall felt her heart swell with pride and break with fear at the same time. Then we'd better go save the wizarding world, she said, drawing her wand, as they made their way back toward the third-floor corridor. McGonagall reflected that this was not at all how she had imagined spending Harry's first year at Hogwarts. But, looking at her son, calm, brave, trusting in their partnership, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. After all, they were family, and family protected each other, no matter the cost. Ready, Mum? Harry asked, as they approached the forbidden corridor. Ready, Mograd, she replied. Together, they stepped into the darkness to face whatever waited below. January 15th, 1992, 2:30 a.m., the third-floor corridor. The enormous, three-headed dog lay sprawled across the trapdoor, snoring peacefully, as the enchanted harp played its endless melody. McGonagall and Harry approached carefully, stepping over massive paws and trying not to breathe too deeply of the creature's overwhelming doggy scent. Hagrid's charm work, McGonagall murmured, observing the harp with professional appreciation. Crude but effective. Quirrell's already through, Harry whispered, pointing to the open trapdoor. We need to hurry. McGonagall looked down into the darkness below, then at her 11-year-old son, and felt her resolve waver for just a moment. There was still time to send Harry back to safety, to face this alone as the adult. But Harry seemed to sense her hesitation. Together, Mum, he said firmly. We do this together, or Quirrell gets the stone, and Voldemort returns. McGonagall nodded, drew her wand, and stepped into the trapdoor. The fall was mercifully cushioned by Devil's Snare, though the plant immediately began wrapping tentacles around them both. Harry remained calm, casting a bright Lumos charm, while McGonagall conjured flames that sent the plant recoiling. Well done, she said, as they extracted themselves from the writhing vines. Your light magic is improving. You taught me well, Harry replied, but his attention was already on the corridor ahead. The next chamber should be the flying keys. They found themselves in a high-ceilinged room filled with hundreds of winged keys fluttering near the vaulted ceiling like a flock of enchanted birds. An old broomstick hung by the door, and across the room, a heavy wooden door stood locked. Professor Flitwick's work, McGonagall observed. Elegant, but impractical for anyone who can't fly. Harry mounted the broomstick without hesitation. I need the one with the bent wing and damaged feathers. It'll be the one that's already been caught. As Harry soared up among the keys, McGonagall felt her heart in her throat. It was one thing to watch him play Quidditch for sport. It was entirely another to watch him navigate a potentially deadly magical trap. But Harry's flying was flawless, his capture of the correct key swift and sure. They moved on. The chess chamber proved more challenging. The enchanted pieces stood ready for battle, and McGonagall quickly realized that Professor McGonagall herself had created this particular protection. "I designed this," she said grimly, studying the board. "Which means I know exactly how to solve it. But it requires human players," Harry observed. "That's why you built it this way, isn't it? You knew students would have to risk themselves." McGonagall felt a surge of self-recrimination. She had helped create a trap designed to test children, never questioning Dumbledore's motives. "I'll take King," she said firmly. "You stay here where it's safe." "Absolutely not," Harry said. "We're partners in this, remember. I'll take the knight's position." The battle was brutal. McGonagall's queen advanced across the board with devastating precision, but the opposing pieces fought back with magical ferocity. When Harry's knight was captured, he threw himself clear, just as the opposing bishop's sword crashed down where he had been standing. "Harry!" McGonagall's concentration wavered for a crucial moment. "I'm fine," Harry called back. "Focus on the game." It took 20 minutes of careful strategy, but McGonagall finally cornered the opposing king. The pieces bowed and stepped aside, allowing them passage. Professor Snape's logic puzzle was almost anticlimactic after the violence of the chess game. 7 bottles containing different potions, a riddle explaining which would allow them to proceed and which would send them back. Harry studied the problem with the same methodical approach he used for his transfiguration homework. "This one leads forward," he said, pointing to the smallest bottle. "And this one leads back. There's only enough for one person in the forward bottle," McGonagall observed. "Then we go together," Harry said simply. "Half each." McGonagall wanted to argue, wanted to send him back to safety while she faced whatever waited ahead alone. But she could see the determination in his green eyes, the same stubborn courage that had made her take him from Privet Drive 11 years ago. "Together," she agreed. The mirror chamber. Professor Quirrell stood before the mirror of Eristade, his hands pressed against its surface and his face twisted with frustration. "Show me the stone," he was muttering. "I need the stone." But the mirror showed only his reflection, stubbornly refusing to reveal what he sought. "You're too late," McGonagall said, stepping into the chamber with her wand drawn. Harry moved beside her, his own wand ready. Quirrell spun around, his face a mask of rage that looked completely wrong on his usually nervous features. "Professor McGonagall," he sneered, "and little Harry Potter. How touching that you came together to die." "Release the stone, Quirrell," McGonagall said firmly. "You don't have to do this. Don't have to." Quirrell laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You have no idea what it's like, having him in my head every moment, demanding, commanding." His voice grew stronger, more confident. "But he promised me power, Professor, power beyond imagination, if I serve him faithfully." "Voldemort," Harry said quietly. "He's possessing you." "Say the name!" Quirrell shrieked. "Yes, Lord Voldemort lives within me, and when I have the stone, he will return to his body and reward my service." McGonagall felt cold dread wash over her. This wasn't just about stopping a theft. They were facing a piece of Voldemort himself. "The mirror won't give you the stone," Harry said, his voice remarkably calm for an 11-year-old facing a possessed dark wizard. "It only shows what you desire, not what you need." "Clever boy," Quirrell snarled. "But you're wrong. Master has told me the mirror's secret. It will give the stone to someone who wants to find it, but not use it." His eyes fixed on Harry with sudden, terrible understanding. "You," he breathed. "You're the one who can get it." "Harry, get back," McGonagall said sharply, moving to shield her son. But Quirrell was faster. With a wordless spell, he sent McGonagall flying across the chamber, her head striking the stone wall with a sickening crack. She collapsed, momentarily stunned. "Mum?" Harry's voice cracked with panic. "Look in the mirror, Potter," Quirrell commanded, grabbing Harry by the shoulders. "Tell me what you see." Harry looked into the mirror's surface, and McGonagall, fighting through her dizziness, saw his expression change to one of wonder. "I see myself," Harry said slowly, "older, standing with my mum, with Professor McGonagall, and we're both safe. The war is over, and Voldemort is gone forever." "Lies!" Quirrell shook him roughly. "What about the stone?" But even as he spoke, McGonagall saw something impossible. Harry's pocket suddenly grew heavy, weighted down by something round and smooth. The Philosopher's Stone. The mirror had given it to him. "He has it." A cold, high voice suddenly filled the chamber, speaking through Quirrell's mouth, but unmistakably different. "The boy has the stone." McGonagall struggled to her feet, her wand shaking in her hand. "Let him go, Voldemort," she said, putting every ounce of authority she possessed into her voice. "Ah, Professor McGonagall," the voice purred. "Still trying to protect children, I see. Still believing that love can conquer all." "It can," McGonagall said firmly. "It already has." "Has it?" Voldemort laughed through Quirrell's mouth. "Then explain this." Quirrell's hands tightened around Harry's shoulders, and Harry screamed in pain as smoke began rising from where skin touched skin. "Your touch burns him," Voldemort hissed. "Your mother's protection is still strong in you, boy, but not strong enough." She cast a protean charm that connected her directly to Harry, sharing his pain, sharing his mother's protection, adding her own love to Lily Potter's sacrifice. The effect was immediate. Quirrell's hands erupted in flames, and he released Harry with a shriek of agony. "Impossible!" Voldemort's voice rose to a scream. "Two mothers' love, two sacrifices, not two," McGonagall gasped, feeling the magical connection burning through her. "One, continuous, unbroken." Quirrell lunged for Harry again, desperation overriding the pain. But when his hands touched Harry's skin, they began to crumble to ash. "Master!" Quirrell screamed. "I can't hold him. I can't." His entire body began to disintegrate, crumbling away like burned parchment. With a final, inhuman shriek, a form made of shadow and malice erupted from the collapsing figure. Voldemort's spirit, visible for just a moment before it fled through the ceiling and was gone. Harry collapsed, and McGonagall caught him as her legs finally gave out. They sank to the floor together, both unconscious before they hit the stone. January 16th, 1992, Hospital Wing. McGonagall woke to the sound of Harry's screaming. She lurched upright in the chair beside his hospital bed, her head pounding from her encounter with the stone wall. Harry was thrashing in his sleep, his scar blazing red against his pale forehead. "Shh, Mograd," she whispered, reaching out to touch his hand. "You're safe. We're safe." But Harry's nightmares continued. In his sleep, he relived Quirrell's touch, Voldemort's voice, the terrible moment when he thought McGonagall might be dead. For 3 days, McGonagall never left his bedside. She slept in the chair, ate meals brought by worried house elves, and held Harry's hand through every nightmare. When he finally woke, his first word was, "Mum." "I'm here," she said immediately. "I'm right here." "Are you hurt?" Harry asked, struggling to sit up. "You hit the wall so hard." "I'm fine, love. Just a bump on the head." McGonagall helped him settle back against the pillows. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been set on fire from the inside out," Harry said honestly. "But alive. We're both alive." "We are indeed." "Professor Dumbledore came by," Harry said quietly. "He explained about the mirror, about how it gave me the stone because I wanted to find it but not use it. And he told me about the protection magic, how your love connected to Mum's love and made it stronger." McGonagall felt tears prick at her eyes. "Harry, he said something else too." Harry continued. "He said that love like that, a mother's love, freely given and sustained, creates magic stronger than any dark arts. He said that's why Voldemort could never understand it, and why he'll never be able to hurt us as long as we have each other." "Do you believe that?" McGonagall asked. Harry looked at her seriously. "I know it. I felt it when Quirrell was burning up. I felt your love protecting me just like Mum's love protected me as a baby." He paused. "I felt like I had 2 mothers fighting for me." "You do," McGonagall said simply. "Lily Potter died to save you. I live to protect you. Between the 2 of us, you're rather thoroughly covered." Harry smiled for the first time since waking up. "I love you, Mum. I love you too, my brave, impossible boy." June 1st, 1992, end-of-year feast. The Great Hall buzzed with excitement as Professor Dumbledore stood to award the House Cup. Gryffindor had been in last place before the final point tallies, but everyone knew that would change. "To Mr. Ron Weasley," Dumbledore announced, "for the best-played game of chess Hogwarts has seen in many years. 50 points. Ron's face turned as red as his hair as the Gryffindor table cheered. "To Miss Hermione Granger for her excellent use of cool logic in the face of fire. 50 points. Hermione buried her face in her hands as her housemates applauded. "To Professor McGonagall," Dumbledore continued, and the entire hall fell silent, "for proving that the best protection we can offer our children is not to shield them from danger, but to stand beside them when they face it. 100 points to Gryffindor." McGonagall felt her cheeks burn as the students erupted in applause. Across the hall, she caught Snape's eye and saw something that might have been approval in his dark gaze. "And to Harry Potter," Dumbledore said, his voice carrying clearly over the noise, "for courage, for loyalty, and for understanding that true strength comes not from standing alone, but from knowing when to trust those who love you. 100 points." The celebration was deafening, but Harry remained quiet in his seat, staring down at his plate. Later, in McGonagall's quarters, she found him sitting by the fire with the same contemplative expression. "Are you proud of me?" he asked without preamble. "Or disappointed?" McGonagall sat beside him, surprised by the question. "Why would I be disappointed? I put myself in danger. I didn't listen when you told me to stay back." Harry looked up at her with worried eyes. "I know you wanted to protect me, and instead, I made you worry." "Harry," McGonagall said gently, "I am proud of your courage and terrified of your future in equal measure, but I would rather have a son who stands up for what's right than one who follows rules blindly. Even when standing up for what's right means facing Voldemort." McGonagall felt her heart clench. "Especially then, because this won't be the last time, will it? He's still out there. He'll come back." There was no point in lying to him now. But when he does, you won't face him alone. You'll have friends who love you, teachers who will fight for you, and, she touched his cheek gently, a mother who will stand between you and the darkness for as long as she draws breath. Promise? Promise. And McGonagall wrapped her arms around him, marveling at how much he had grown this year, not just physically, but in understanding, in courage, in wisdom. Mum? Harry said sleepily. Yes, love. And thank you for coming with me tonight, and thank you for letting me be brave. McGonagall pressed a kiss to his messy hair. Thank you for being worth saving. Outside the window, Hogwarts Castle settled into peaceful sleep. In a few weeks, Harry would complete his first year as a student, but tonight he was simply her son, safe in her arms, protected by love that had proven stronger than the darkest magic. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new tests of their courage and bond. But whatever came, they would face it together. After all, they were family, and family, McGonagall reflected as Harry dozed against her shoulder, was the most powerful magic of all. June 15th, 1992. Hogwarts Express platform. McGonagall stood on the platform, watching parents reunite with their children, and felt a strange pang of, what? Not quite loneliness, but something close to it. For the first time in 11 years, she was watching other families embrace while her son prepared to leave her side. "You're sure about this?" she asked Harry, who was adjusting his trunk for the third time. "You could spend the entire summer at Hogwarts. We could work on advanced transfiguration theory or explore the restricted section." "Mum," Harry said gently, "I want to see how normal families work. Ron's invited me to the Burrow for a week, and Hermione wants to show me some of the Muggle libraries in London." He looked up at her with those earnest green eyes. "I need to understand the world outside Hogwarts if I'm going to protect it." McGonagall's throat tightened. Ever since the confrontation with Quirrell, Harry had been different, more serious, more aware of the weight he carried. She supposed that was inevitable after facing Voldemort, even a weakened version, but she mourned the loss of his childhood innocence. "Just remember," she said, straightening his collar unnecessarily, "if you need anything at all, you can come home immediately." "I know," Harry said, then surprised her by hugging her tightly. "I love you, Mum. I love you too, Mograd, more than you'll ever know." June 20th, 1992. The Burrow. Harry had thought he understood families. He had McGonagall after all, and he'd observed the easy affection between the various Hogwarts staff members whom had helped raise him. But the Burrow was chaos. "Fred, George, get down here this instant." Mrs. Weasley's voice could probably be heard in the next county. "And bring whatever's making that horrible smell." Harry sat at the kitchen table, trying to eat his breakfast, while 6 different conversations happened around him simultaneously. Mr. Weasley was absorbed in a Muggle rubber duck he'd found somewhere. Percy was lecturing anyone who would listen about proper cauldron maintenance. Ron and Ginny were arguing about Quidditch teams, and the twins were conspicuously absent, despite their mother's shouting, "More bacon, dear." Mrs. Weasley asked Harry, piling food onto his plate without waiting for an answer. "You're far too thin. Doesn't Professor McGonagall feed you properly?" "She feeds me fine," Harry said quickly, feeling defensive. "She makes excellent porridge, and she taught me to cook when I was little." "You cook?" Mrs. Weasley looked scandalized. "But you're just a boy. The house elves taught me," Harry explained. "Mum thought it was important that I know how to take care of myself." "Well, yes, but Mrs. Weasley seemed at a loss. "You shouldn't have to take care of yourself, love. You should be taken care of." Harry considered this, watching as she bustled around the kitchen, simultaneously preparing lunch, organizing laundry, and keeping track of 7 different family members. It was warm and loving, and completely overwhelming. "Mrs. Weasley," he said carefully, "do you ever get time to yourself? To read, or play music, or just think?" She laughed as if the idea were absurd. "Oh, Harry, with this lot, I haven't had a quiet moment since Bill was born. But that's what mothers do, isn't it? We take care of everyone else." Harry thought about McGonagall's quiet evenings by the fire, her piano playing, her scholarly conversations with other professors. He thought about how she had always made time for him while still maintaining her own interests and identity. Maybe there were different ways to be a mother. July 15th, 1992. Diagon Alley. "Oh my goodness, it's really him, Harry Potter." Harry winced as yet another witch approached their group outside Flourish and Blots. McGonagall had agreed to accompany him and the Weasleys for their school shopping trip, but the combination of Harry's presence and the publicity surrounding Gilderoy Lockhart's new book signing had created a media circus. "Mr. Potter," the witch gushed, "could I possibly have your autograph? My daughter is starting Hogwarts this year, and she's such a fan." "I'm sorry," McGonagall said smoothly, stepping between Harry and the woman, "but Mr. Potter is here for school shopping, not publicity. But surely, just one quick photograph." "No." McGonagall's voice carried the authority of someone who had been refusing unreasonable requests from students for decades. "Thank you for understanding." As they made their way through the crowd toward the bookstore, Harry caught sight of a familiar figure, Lucius Malfoy, standing with his son Draco near the entrance, watching their approach with calculating eyes. "Professor McGonagall," Malfoy said smoothly as they drew near. "How interesting to see you here with young Mr. Potter. I had heard rumors about your unusual guardianship arrangement." McGonagall's expression grew arctic. "Mr. Malfoy, I do hope the boy is receiving proper guidance," Malfoy continued, his tone suggesting concern while his eyes glinted with malice. "Growing up in such an institutional environment, without the influence of a real family, proper bloodline connections." "Harry has everything he needs," McGonagall said quietly. But Harry could see the dangerous stillness in her posture that meant she was furious. "Oh, I'm sure you've done your best," Malfoy said dismissively. "But surely you understand that a child needs more than academic instruction. He needs to understand his place in wizarding society, his obligations to his betters." "The only thing Harry needs to understand," McGonagall interrupted, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness, "is how to distinguish between people worth respecting and people who mistake breeding for character." Malfoy's eyes flashed. "How dare you raise a child to judge others by their actions rather than their family trees?" McGonagall stepped closer, and something in her expression made Malfoy take an involuntary step backward. "Harry knows exactly who he is, Mr. Malfoy. He's a young man who faces danger to protect others, who treats house elves with kindness, who judges people by their hearts rather than their bank accounts. I could not be prouder of what he's becoming." "We'll see," Malfoy said coldly, "how proud you are when the boy's unusual upbringing causes problems for everyone around him." As the Malfoys swept away, Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. There had been something in Lucius Malfoy's tone, a suggestion of knowledge, of plans already in motion. "Mum," Harry said quietly, "I think he knows something about this year, about what's coming." McGonagall nodded grimly. "I think you're right. We'll need to be very careful." July 31st, 1992, Harry's 12th birthday. For the first time, Harry's birthday celebration included friends. Ron and Hermione had come to Hogwarts for the week, and the Great Hall had been decorated with floating candles and enchanted banners that shifted between Gryffindor colours and Highland tartan in honour of McGonagall's heritage. "This is incredible," Hermione said, examining the cake that the house elves had created. A perfect replica of Hogwarts Castle, complete, with moving figures and miniature fireworks erupting from the towers. The magic required for this level of detail, Winky and the others enjoy showing off for special occasions. McGonagall said fondly, watching Harry laugh as Ron tried to catch one of the tiny fireworks with his bare hands. "Professor McGonagall," Hermione said suddenly. "I've been researching protective enchantments, and I found something interesting about what happened with Professor Quirrell. The magic you used, connecting your love to Mrs. Potter's sacrifice. It's not just powerful, it's groundbreaking." McGonagall looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean that according to every text I've read, protective enchantments based on sacrificial love are supposed to be unique, one-time magical events. They can't be replicated or enhanced." Hermione's eyes were bright with intellectual excitement. "But you did both. You created a new layer of protection and connected it to an existing one. That should be theoretically impossible. Unless," McGonagall said slowly, "the magic recognizes that both sacrifices spring from the same source. Lily Potter died to protect Harry. I've spent 11 years living to protect him. Perhaps the magic sees no distinction between the two." "You think it's treating you as Harry's real mother?" Ron asked, looking fascinated. "I think," McGonagall said carefully, "that magic cares more about love than law. Harry is my son in every way that matters. Perhaps that's enough." Harry, who had been listening with growing wonder, set down his piece of cake. "Does that mean, am I protected from Voldemort as long as you're alive?" "We don't know," McGonagall admitted, "but we're certainly not going to test it unnecessarily." "Good," Harry said firmly, "because I'm not losing another mother. Not ever." August 20th, 1992. McGonagall's quarters. "Higher," McGonagall instructed, watching as Harry attempted to transfigure a stone block into an intricate clockwork mechanism. "And remember, the magic follows your intent. You're not just changing the shape, you're changing the fundamental nature of the object." Harry's brow furrowed with concentration as his wand traced complex patterns in the air. This was far beyond anything taught to second years. McGonagall was pushing him toward any WD-level theory, preparing him for challenges she prayed he would never have to face. "There," Harry said, triumphantly as gears and springs materialized within the stone, creating a perfectly functional clock. "How was that?" "Excellent," McGonagall said proudly. "Your understanding of complex transfiguration has improved remarkably. But remember, the goal isn't just to perform advanced magic. It's to understand when and why to use it." "Because power without wisdom is dangerous," Harry recited. "You've only told me that about 100 times. And I'll tell you 100 more, if necessary," McGonagall said firmly. "Harry, what we learned this year. About your fame, about Voldemort's continued existence, about the expectations people have of you. It's only the beginning. People are going to try to use you, to manipulate you, to turn you into a weapon for their own causes. Like Dumbledore did with the stone." McGonagall sighed. "Like Professor Dumbledore did. Yes, but also like Lucius Malfoy and his allies will try to do. In different ways. You need to be strong enough to resist all of them." "What if I'm not?" Harry asked quietly. "What if I make the wrong choice?" "Then you'll learn from it and make a better choice next time," McGonagall said simply. "That's what growing up means, love. Not being perfect, but being willing to keep trying to do better. They were interrupted by a loud crack as a house elf apparated directly into the room. But this wasn't one of the Hogwarts elves. This creature was wearing a filthy pillowcase and had tennis ball-sized eyes filled with desperate urgency. "Dobby is sorry to disturb Professor McGonagall and great Harry Potter, sir," the elf squeaked. "But Dobby must warn. Dobby must tell. Terrible things are coming to Hogwarts School." McGonagall was on her feet instantly, wand drawn. "Who are you? How did you get past the wards?" "Dobby is a house elf," the creature said, wringing his hands. "Dobby serves a wizarding family, but Dobby cannot say which family. Pay is planning terrible things for this year. Things that will hurt students, things that will hurt Harry Potter most of all." "What kind of things?" Harry asked, stepping protectively closer to McGonagall. "The Chamber of Secrets," Dobby whispered, and his words seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. "It will be opened again. The monster will hunt again. Muggle-borns will suffer. And Harry Potter," the elf's eyes filled with tears, "Harry Potter must not be at Hogwarts when it happens." She had been at Hogwarts during the last time the chamber was opened, 50 years ago. She remembered the fear, the lockdowns, the girl who had died. "Who is planning to open it?" she asked sharply. But Dobby was already backing toward the window, shaking his head frantically. "Dobby cannot say. Dobby has said too much already. But please, please do not let Harry Potter return to Hogwarts. It is not safe." With another crack, the elf vanished, leaving Harry and McGonagall staring at each other in the sudden silence. "Well," McGonagall said grimly, "it seems we have our answer about Mr. Malfoy's cryptic threats." "The Chamber of Secrets," Harry repeated. "Do you know what that means?" "I know enough," McGonagall said, moving to her desk and pulling out a thick file. "And I know that whoever is planning this expects you to be vulnerable, isolated, unprotected." She looked up at him with fierce determination. "They're about to learn how wrong they are." "What are we going to do?" "We're going to research everything we can about Salazar Slytherin, the Chamber of Secrets, and the monster that lives within it," McGonagall said, spreading ancient texts across her desk. "And then we're going to return to Hogwarts together, with full knowledge of the danger and a plan to stop it." Harry nodded, settling into his chair with the serious expression that had become more common since his encounter with Voldemort. "Together," he agreed, as they bent over the ancient books. McGonagall reflected that this was what she had realized over the summer. Protecting Harry didn't mean shielding him from the truth or from danger. It meant preparing him to face both with knowledge, skill, and the unshakable certainty that he was not alone. Whatever dark plans were being laid for Harry's second year, whoever thought they could use him, or harm him, or turn him into a victim, they would discover that Harry Potter was not the isolated, vulnerable child they expected. He was a young wizard trained by the best, protected by powerful magic, and backed by a mother who would burn the world down before she let anyone hurt her son. Let them come. She and Harry would be ready. September 1st, 1992. King's Cross Station. McGonagall paced the length of platform 9 3/4 for the 15th time, her tartan robes billowing behind her as she checked her pocket watch again. The Hogwarts Express had departed 20 minutes ago, and Harry Potter was nowhere to be found. "Perhaps he's already on the train," Professor Flitwick suggested weakly, though they both knew Harry would have found her before boarding. "He's not on the train," McGonagall said grimly. Some things happened. She had spent the summer preparing for threats to Harry's safety, researching the Chamber of Secrets, and training him in advanced defensive magic. What she hadn't prepared for was him simply vanishing between the leaky cauldron and platform 9 3/4. The sound of splintering wood and screaming metal from somewhere above made her look up in alarm. A battered Ford Anglia was descending rapidly toward the platform, steam pouring from its hood and branches sticking out of its grille. "Oh, for Merlin's sake," McGonagall breathed as she recognized the two figures visible through the windshield. The car hit the platform with a tremendous crash, sending startled parents diving for cover. The doors flew open, and Harry and Ron tumbled out, both looking shaken and covered in scratches. Harry James Potter McGonagall. McGonagall's voice could probably be heard in Edinburgh. "What in the name of all that's holy do you think you're doing?" Harry looked up at her with relief mixed with terror. "Mum, the barrier, it was sealed. We couldn't get through, and the train was leaving, and Mr. Weasley's car was right there." "So you decided to fly an illegal, unregistered Muggle vehicle to Scotland." McGonagall's accent was so thick with fury and fear that she was barely comprehensible. "Through Muggle airspace, in broad daylight, with half the Ministry's misuse of Muggle artifacts department probably tracking you." "We didn't know what else to do," Ron said weakly. "The barrier wouldn't let us through." McGonagall closed her eyes and took 3 deep breaths, reminding herself that they were alive and unhurt, and that murdering them in public would set a poor example for the other students. "Get your things," she said finally. "We're going to Hogwarts. Now, and you." She fixed Harry with a stare that could have melted steel. R grounded until further notice. October 15th, 1992. McGonagall's quarters. "You're treating me like a child," Harry said, his 12-year-old voice cracking with frustration. "I can handle this, Mum. I proved that last year." "Last year, you nearly died," McGonagall replied sharply, not looking up from the stack of essays she was grading with rather more force than necessary. "And this year, someone is deliberately targeting Muggle-born students with a monster that can kill with a glance. But I'm not Muggle-born. That's not the point." McGonagall's quill snapped in her grip. "The point is that someone has opened the Chamber of Secrets. Someone who clearly has a vendetta against students like your friends. And I will not allow you to wander the corridors alone just because you're bored with being safe." Every line of his body radiating adolescent mutiny. "So what am I supposed to do? Sit in here every evening while my friends are out there in danger? Your friends are perfectly safe as long as they travel in groups and follow the curfew rules," McGonagall said, though even she didn't sound entirely convinced. Mrs. Norris was just a cat. Colin Creevey and the others were merely petrified, not killed. The monster isn't trying to murder students. It's trying to terrorize them. Then why are you so worried about me specifically? McGonagall set down her broken quill and looked at her son directly. "Because, Morgrad, you have a talent for being exactly where the most dangerous things happen. And because whoever opened the chamber knows who you are, knows your history, and probably expects you to try to stop them." "So I should stop them," Harry said logically. "That's what we do, isn't it? We protect people." "We do," McGonagall agreed, "but we do it intelligently, with proper preparation and backup, not by charging blindly into ancient magical death traps." And Harry was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're scared?" "Terrified," McGonagall admitted. "I've been terrified since the first message appeared on the wall. Because 50 years ago, when the chamber was opened before, a student died, a student barely older than you are now. What happened to her? Myrtle Warren. She was found in the second-floor girls' bathroom, dead from looking directly into the monster's eyes." McGonagall's voice grew soft with old grief. "She was a quiet girl, a bit odd but harmless. And she died because someone thought her blood wasn't pure enough." Harry absorbed this soberly. Is she the ghost in that bathroom? Moaning Myrtle, death traumatized her so badly that she couldn't move on. She's been haunting that bathroom for 50 years, reliving her murder over and over. Then we have to stop this, Harry said firmly, before anyone else gets hurt. We will, McGonagall promised, but carefully, together, with a plan. 1992 Hospital Wing. McGonagall found Harry sitting beside Hermione's petrified form, holding her stone-rigid hand and talking to her in a quiet, steady voice. So, Ron's brother Percy has been made head boy, which is going to his head something awful. He keeps trying to give people detentions for breathing too loudly. And Professor Lockhart is still completely useless. Yesterday he tried to demonstrate a banishing charm and ended up vanishing half the ceiling. Harry, McGonagall said gently, settling into the chair on Hermione's other side. You've been here for 3 hours. You should eat something. She can hear me, Harry said, without looking up. Madame Pomfrey says victims of petrification retain some awareness. I don't want her to think we've abandoned her. McGonagall felt her heart break a little. We could never abandon Hermione. She's family. I should have protected her better, Harry said, his voice thick with guilt. I should have figured out what the monster was, should have stopped this before she got hurt. Harry, love, this is not your fault, isn't it? Harry finally looked up at her, his green eyes bright with unshed tears. Everyone expects me to be the hero, to solve these things, to save people. But I failed. She's lying here turned to stone, because I couldn't be what everyone needed me to be. McGonagall reached across Hermione's still form to cup Harry's face. Listen to me very carefully. You are not responsible for the evil that others choose to do. You are not required to be perfect or omniscient or capable of preventing every tragedy. You are 12 years old, and the fact that you even feel responsible for protecting your classmates shows what a remarkable young man you're becoming. But if I was better, if you were better, you'd be an adult with decades of experience and training, which you are not, McGonagall said firmly. And even adults with all that experience haven't solved this mystery yet. So stop carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders and focus on what you can actually do to help. Harry nodded slowly, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. What can I do? You can be observant. You can ask good questions. You can work with me to research possible solutions. McGonagall stood and straightened Hermione's blankets. And you can trust that we will find the person responsible for this and stop them. Together, McGonagall confirmed. Always together. February 10th, 1993. McGonagall's quarters. Mum, I need to show you something, and you're not going to like it. McGonagall looked up from her correspondence to find Harry standing in her doorway with what appeared to be a blank diary clutched in his hands. Everything about his posture screamed reluctant confession. What is it? She asked, though something about the innocent-looking book made her skin crawl. I found this in Ginny's cauldron when we were shopping in Diagon Alley, Harry said, settling into his chair and opening the diary. At first, I thought it was just a school diary, but then he picked up a quill and wrote, "Hello," on the open page. McGonagall watched in horror as the ink vanished. Then new words appeared in a different handwriting. Hello, Harry. My name is Tom Riddle. Sweet Merlin, McGonagall breathed, recognizing the dark magic radiating from the object. Harry, put that down. Don't touch it again. It's been talking to me for months, Harry continued, though he did set the diary on the table between them. This Tom person claims he was a student 50 years ago, when the chamber was opened before. He says he captured the person responsible, and that he can show me who it was. And you believed him. McGonagall's voice was sharp with fear and anger. "Harry, this is dark magic. This diary, whatever it is, has been influencing your mind." "I know," Harry said quietly. "I figured that out when I started having memory gaps. Hours I couldn't account for. Times when I felt like I was watching myself from outside my own body." He looked up at her with eyes far too old for 12. "But I also think this might be connected to the chamber. Tom Riddle. I've been researching him in the school records. He received an award for special services 50 years ago, right around the time the chamber attacks stopped." McGonagall stared at the diary, every instinct screaming danger. "Harry, whatever this thing has been telling you, whatever promises it's made, it's lying. Magical objects that preserve personality and memory are incredibly dangerous. They feed off the life force of whoever interacts with them." "Like Horcruxes?" Harry asked, and McGonagall went cold. "Where did you hear that term?" "I found it in one of the restricted section books while researching dark artifacts. The book said Horcruxes are objects that contain pieces of a wizard's soul, created through murder and dark rituals." Harry looked at the diary with new understanding. "That's what this is, isn't it?" McGonagall felt sick. "If it is, then whoever created it is still alive, and this diary is actively trying to return them to life by draining yours. That Tom Riddle isn't trying to help me solve the mystery. He's trying to manipulate me into helping him come back. And he's been doing it for months," McGonagall said grimly. "Harry, what have you told this diary? What has it convinced you to do?" "Nothing major," Harry said quickly. "Just asked questions about my life, my friends, my experiences with Voldemort." He trailed off, realizing the implications. "He's been gathering intelligence," McGonagall said, pieces clicking into place. "Learning about your weaknesses, your connections, your fears, and all the while he's been growing stronger by feeding off your life force." Harry stared at the diary with growing horror. If this is a Horcrux, and if Tom Riddle made it, his face went white. "Tom Marvolo Riddle. It's an anagram, isn't it? I am Lord Voldemort." "Harry, we need to destroy this thing immediately." "But if we destroy it, how will we find out who's been opening the chamber? How will we stop the attacks?" "We'll find another way," McGonagall said firmly. "But we cannot allow a piece of Voldemort's soul to remain in this castle, influencing students and growing stronger." Before Harry could respond, a tremor ran through the castle, followed by the sound of running feet in the corridors outside. "Another attack," Harry said grimly. McGonagall was already moving toward the door when Professor Lockhart burst in, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his face pale with panic. "Professor McGonagall. Thank Merlin. The monster's taken a student into the chamber itself. They found the entrance, and they want me to go after her. But I can't. I don't think." "Who?" McGonagall's voice cut through his babbling like a blade. "Who was taken?" "Ginny Weasley," Lockhart said, wringing his hands. "Ron's sister, first year. They found a message on the wall. Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever." Harry was on his feet instantly. The diary forgotten. "We have to go after her." "We?" Lockhart squeaked. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly." "Not you," McGonagall said grimly, already planning their approach. "You're going to tell the other professors that Professor Lockhart and I have gone after Miss Weasley. Then you're going to disappear, preferably to somewhere very far away. Because if any harm comes to that child while you're cowering here, I will personally ensure that your cowardice becomes front-page news in every magical publication in Britain." Lockhart fled. "Mum," Harry said quietly, "if Tom Riddle is behind this, If the diary is how he's been controlling the monster, then we destroy the diary and save Ginny, McGonagall said firmly. Together. Together, Harry agreed, picking up the diary with grim determination. The Chamber of Secrets. The chamber was exactly as terrifying as McGonagall had imagined. A vast, ancient space lined with serpentine pillars and filled with the sound of dripping water. At the far end, Ginny Weasley lay motionless beside a pool of black water, her red hair the only color in the green-tinted darkness. Standing over her was a figure McGonagall recognized from old-school photographs. Tom Riddle, 16 years old and solid enough to cast a shadow. Professor McGonagall, Tom said politely, as though they had met for tea rather than in an ancient chamber of horrors. And Harry Potter, how kind of you to join us. Let her go, Harry said, his wand trained on Tom's chest. Whatever you're doing to Ginny, stop it. I'm afraid I can't do that, Tom replied, his handsome face wearing an expression of false regret. You see, young Ginny has been pouring her soul into my diary for months. All her deepest fears, her secrets, her growing despair over her hopeless crush on the famous Harry Potter. And I've been drinking it in, growing stronger, becoming more real. Soon I'll be solid enough to leave this place, and she'll be too weak to survive. The diary, McGonagall breathed, understanding flooding through her. You've been possessing her through the diary. Possessing is such an ugly word, Tom said. I prefer to think of it as guidance. Little Ginny has been so very helpful, opening the chamber, controlling the basilisk, leaving those delightful messages on the walls. She even killed Hagrid's roosters. Basilisks hate the sound of roosters, you know. You monster, Harry said, moving toward Ginny's still form. She's just a child. As was I, when I made my first Horcrux, Tom said conversationally. Remarkable magic, really. The ability to preserve one's essence, to achieve a form of immortality through the sacrifice of lesser souls. McGonagall was moving even as Tom spoke, her wand tracing complex patterns in the air. Stone shields erupted from the chamber floor, creating barriers between them and Tom, just as a massive serpentine head emerged from the water. The basilisk was enormous, 60 feet long and thick as an oak tree, with scales that gleamed like armor and eyes like burning emeralds. But McGonagall had prepared for this. Don't look directly at it, she shouted to Harry, even as she continued her transfiguration work. The stone pillars around the chamber began reshaping themselves into a maze of barriers and hiding spots. How heroic, Tom said, watching their preparations with mild interest, but ultimately pointless. The basilisk can kill with a glance, can petrify through reflection, and its fangs carry venom that can kill in minutes. What hope do you have against such a creature? His answer came in the form of a phoenix. Fawkes swooped down from somewhere high above, his song filling the chamber with fierce beauty. The basilisk recoiled from the music, and Tom's confident expression faltered. Impossible, he breathed. How did Dumbledore's phoenix find this place? Magic calls to magic, McGonagall said grimly, creating more barriers as the basilisk began to move. And love calls to love. Fawkes attacked the basilisk's eyes, his talons striking with surgical precision. The creature's screams echoed through the chamber as it thrashed blindly, no longer able to kill with its gaze. Harry, McGonagall called out. The diary! Destroy the diary! But even as Harry moved toward the black book, the blinded basilisk lashed out with deadly accuracy. Its massive tail swept toward him, and McGonagall acted on pure instinct. She threw herself between Harry and the basilisk, feeling the creature's tail strike her ribs with bone-crushing force. Pain exploded through her chest as she flew through the air, crashing into one of her own stone barriers. Echoed through the chamber. Through the haze of pain, McGonagall saw Fawkes drop something near Harry. A sword, gleaming with silver light. Gryffindor's sword, she realized dimly. The diary, Harry. She managed to gasp. Stab the diary. He was moving toward Harry with desperate speed, his form flickering between solid and translucent as Ginny's life force continued to drain away. Harry grabbed the sword just as the basilisk struck again. The blade sank deep into the creature's mouth, piercing the roof and driving up into its brain. The basilisk collapsed, its death throes shaking the entire chamber. But one of its fangs had broken off in the attack, and as Harry pulled back the sword, the fangs slashed across his arm, opening a deep wound that immediately began to burn with venom. Harry. McGonagall tried to reach him, but her ribs were broken, and every breath was agony. The diary, Harry said through gritted teeth, picking up the basilisk fang, even as poison spread through his veins. Have to destroy. He drove the fang into the diary's cover. Tom Riddle's scream shook the chamber as black ink poured from the book like blood. His form began to dissolve, fading from solid to transparent to nothing. This is not possible, Tom gasped as he disappeared. I am immortal. As the diary crumbled to ash, Ginny Weasley drew a shuddering breath, and Fawkes, beautiful Fawkes, settled beside Harry and began to cry. Phoenix tears, McGonagall remembered dimly. Phoenix tears could heal any wound. By the time Dumbledore arrived with the other professors, Harry was cradling Ginny protectively, while Fawkes perched on his shoulder, and McGonagall was using her wand to splint her own ribs with characteristic stubbornness. The diary was a Horcrux, Harry reported without preamble. Tom Riddle was Voldemort as a teenager. He was possessing Ginny through the diary, using her to control the basilisk. And now he's destroyed, McGonagall added firmly, not caring about Dumbledore's stunned expression. The Horcrux is gone, the basilisk is dead, and no one else will be hurt. How did you know? Dumbledore began. We researched, Harry said simply. We prepared, we worked together. As they helped Ginny from the chamber and began the long journey back to safety, McGonagall reflected that this was what she had learned. Protecting Harry didn't mean keeping him away from danger. It meant standing beside him when he faced it, ensuring he had the knowledge and support he needed to triumph. They were battered, exhausted, and would both be recovering for weeks. But they had saved Ginny Weasley, destroyed a piece of Voldemort's soul, and proven once again that love and preparation could triumph over even the darkest magic. As they emerged into sunlight, Harry took her hand and squeezed gently. Thank you, Mum, he said quietly, for believing I could do it. Thank you, Mograd, she replied, for proving me right. Together, they walked home to Hogwarts, where family waited to welcome them back. July 31st, 1993, Harry's 13th birthday. Happy birthday, Mograd, McGonagall said softly, setting down a cup of tea beside Harry's breakfast plate. The great hall was decorated with floating candles in his honor. But something felt different this year. Heavier. Harry looked up from his copy of the Daily Prophet, his green eyes troubled. Did you see this? McGonagall glanced at the headline she'd been dreading all week. Black Still at Large. Minister fears for Harry Potter's safety. Sirius Black, she said carefully, sitting across from him. Yes, I've seen it. The article says he's the first person to ever escape from Azkaban. That he was my parents' best friend. That he betrayed them to Voldemort. Harry's voice was carefully controlled, but McGonagall could hear the hurt underneath. It says he might be coming for me. The Ministry believes he might target you. Yes, McGonagall said, choosing her words carefully. Which is why we're going to take extra precautions this year. What kind of precautions? McGonagall hesitated. She had spent the week in meetings with ministry officials, listening to their demands that Harry be moved to a secure location for his protection. The idea of handing her son over to ministry custody made her physically ill. Dementors, she said finally. Minister Fudge wants to station Dementors around Hogwarts. Harry went very still. Dementors, the things from Azkaban, soul-sucking creatures that feed on happiness and hope. McGonagall said grimly, Fudge believes they'll be able to detect Black if he tries to approach the school. And what do you think? I think, McGonagall said, her accent thickening with suppressed fury, that surrounding children with creatures that literally drain joy from the world is the most criminally irresponsible decision I've ever witnessed from the ministry. Harry was quiet for a moment, processing this. They affect me more than other people, don't they, because of what happened to my parents? McGonagall felt her heart clench. Even at 13, Harry was too perceptive for his own good. Probably, she admitted. You've experienced more trauma than most adults, let alone children. Dementors feed on those memories, make you relive them. Then we'll deal with it, Harry said simply. Together. Together, McGonagall agreed, though privately she was already planning to hex Minister Fudge if any harm came to Harry from his idiotic policies. September 2nd, 1993. Hogwarts Express. The Dementor attack happened without warning. One moment Harry was sitting in his compartment with Ron, Hermione, and a sleeping man who had introduced himself as Professor Lupin, and the next moment the train was filled with cold that went deeper than winter. McGonagall felt it in her bones as she patrolled the train. The wrongness, the creeping despair that meant Dementors were near. She was moving before conscious thought kicked in, racing through the corridors toward Harry's compartment. She found him collapsed on the floor, his face paper white and his body convulsing as the Dementor loomed over him. Professor Lupin was already casting a Patronus charm, driving the creature back, but Harry was lost in whatever horror the Dementor had forced him to relive. Harry. McGonagall dropped to her knees beside him, gathering him into her arms as she had when he was small. Harry, it's over. You're safe. Mum, Harry whispered, his voice raw with terror. I heard her. I heard my mother screaming before she died. McGonagall felt rage so pure it was almost physical. Professor Lupin, she said, her voice deadly quiet as she helped Harry sit up. Could you explain to me why Dementors were allowed to board this train? They're searching for Sirius Black, Lupin said apologetically, offering Harry a piece of chocolate. The ministry insisted. I'm sorry, Harry. Dementors affect some people more than others. Because some people have lived through things that should never happen to children, McGonagall said sharply. She turned to Harry, smoothing his hair back from his pale face. How are you feeling? Like I've been turned inside out, Harry said honestly. But better, the chocolate helps. We're going to learn how to defend against this, McGonagall said firmly. If the ministry insists on surrounding you with soul-sucking monsters, then we're going to make sure you can protect yourself from them. October 15th, 1993. Defense against the Dark Arts classroom. The Patronus charm, Professor Lupin explained, is the only known defense against Dementors. It requires you to focus on a powerfully happy memory while casting the spell. Harry stood before the boggart Dementor, his wand raised and his jaw set with determination. He had been practicing for weeks, but the spell remained stubbornly beyond his reach. Think of the happiest moment you can remember, Lupin coached. Something that fills you with joy. Harry closed his eyes, and McGonagall saw his face soften as he found his memory. Expecto Patronum. A wisp of silver mist emerged from his wand, but it wasn't strong enough. The boggart Dementor advanced, and Harry staggered backward as cold despair washed over him. "That's enough for today," Lupin said quickly, banishing the boggart. "No," Harry said firmly. "I can do this. I need a stronger memory." He closed his eyes again, and this time McGonagall saw something different in his expression. Pure contentment, deep and unshakable. Expecto Patronum. The silver mist exploded from his wand, taking shape in the air. McGonagall gasped as she recognized the form, not a stag like his father's, but a great Scottish wildcat, all flowing grace and fierce protection. "Remarkable," Lupin breathed. "What memory did you use?" Harry opened his eyes, looking slightly embarrassed. "The first time Mum read to me. I was maybe 6 years old, and I had nightmares about before, about being alone. She held me all night and read me Highland fairy tales until I fell asleep. I felt completely safe for the first time in my life." McGonagall felt tears prick at her eyes. "Harry, it's the strongest memory I have," Harry said simply. "Being loved unconditionally. Being home." October 31st, 1993. Quidditch pitch. McGonagall watched from the stands as Harry soared through the air on his Nimbus 2000, chasing the golden snitch through wind and rain. The weather was terrible, but Harry was in his element, flying with the natural grace that never failed to terrify and amaze her. Then she felt it, the bone-deep cold that meant Dementors were approaching. "No," she breathed, rising from her seat as dozens of black-cloaked figures glided onto the pitch. Harry was too focused on the snitch to notice the danger, until it was too late. McGonagall watched in horror as he went rigid in mid-air, his face contorting with remembered trauma. And then he was falling, 60 feet toward the hard ground below. "Harry!" Her scream tore through the storm. Dumbledore's magic caught Harry just before he hit the ground, but McGonagall was already running, pushing through the crowd to reach her son. She found him unconscious and pale, his breathing shallow and his skin like ice. "Get those things away from here," she snarled at the Dementor guards, who were still circling the pitch like vultures. "Now!" In the hospital wing later, as Harry recovered under Madame Pomfrey's care, McGonagall sat beside his bed and finally allowed herself to break down. She had been so close to losing him, so close to watching him fall to his death because of the Ministry's criminally negligent policies. "I'm all right, Mum," Harry said softly, his voice hoarse from the Dementor's influence. "You nearly died," McGonagall said, not bothering to hide her tears. "You fell 60 feet because those monsters were allowed onto school grounds." "But I didn't die," Harry pointed out. "Professor Dumbledore caught me, and my Patronus is getting stronger. Next time." "There shouldn't be a next time," McGonagall said fiercely. "You shouldn't have to defend yourself against creatures that have no business being near children." Harry was quiet for a moment, then said, "The firebolt arrived today." McGonagall's expression hardened. An anonymous gift of the most expensive racing broom in the world, arriving just after Harry's current broom had been destroyed in his fall. Her protective instincts went into overdrive. "I've confiscated it for testing," she said firmly. "What?" Harry struggled to sit up. "Mum, it's a firebolt. It's the fastest broom ever made. It's also completely anonymous, arrived at a suspiciously convenient time, and could be cursed with any number of dark arts," McGonagall said sharply. "I won't have you riding a potentially dangerous object just because it's shiny and fast." "You're being paranoid," Harry said, and there was an edge to his voice she'd never heard before. "I'm being careful," McGonagall replied. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Harry's voice was rising now, his 13-year-old frustration finally boiling over. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're so terrified of losing me that you won't let me have anything good. Harry. I'm not a baby anymore, Harry shouted. I've faced Voldemort twice. I killed a basilisk. I can handle a flying broom. You're 13 years old, McGonagall said, her own voice growing sharp. And you just fell 60 feet because you couldn't maintain focus around Dementors. Forgive me if I'm not ready to trust your judgment about what's safe. Maybe that's because you're not my real mother, Harry snapped, the words tumbling out in anger before he could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. McGonagall went very still, her face draining of color as though Harry had physically struck her. I see, she said quietly. In that case, perhaps you'd prefer to discuss your broom with your real family when they're available. She rose from her chair with dignity, but Harry could see the devastation in her eyes before she turned away. Mum, wait. Harry started, already regretting his words. Rest well, Mr. Potter, McGonagall said formally. I'm sure Madame Pomfrey will take excellent care of you. And Harry was alone with the crushing realization that he had just broken the heart of the woman who had saved him, raised him, and loved him unconditionally for 12 years. December 20th, 1993. McGonagall's quarters. Harry stood outside his childhood home for 3 days before he finally worked up the courage to knock. The last month had been agony. McGonagall treating him with perfect professional courtesy in class, but none of the warmth that had defined their relationship. She had returned his tested firebolt without comment, attended his Quidditch matches without celebration, and answered his questions with efficient brevity. He was dying by inches. Come in, her voice said from within. Harry entered to find McGonagall sitting by the fire, grading essays. She looked up at him with polite inquiry, as though he were any other student requesting office hours. Professor McGonagall, Harry began formally, then stopped. Mum, he tried again. Something flickered in her eyes, but her expression remained carefully neutral. I wanted to apologize, Harry continued, moving to stand before the fireplace where he had spent so many happy evenings. What I said in the hospital wing, it was cruel and wrong, and I didn't mean it. Didn't you? McGonagall asked quietly. Children often speak their deepest truths when they're angry. No, Harry said firmly. I spoke my deepest fears when I was angry. I was afraid that you didn't trust me, didn't see me as capable, still saw me as the baby you took from Privet Drive. So I said the thing I knew would hurt you most. McGonagall set down her quill, and for the first time in weeks, she looked at him without professional distance. Harry, you are my real mother, Harry said, his voice cracking with emotion. You're the only mother I remember. You taught me to walk and talk and think. You held me through nightmares and celebrated my victories and loved me, even when I was being a complete prat. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Lily Potter gave birth to me, but you made me who I am, and I'm so sorry for making you think otherwise. McGonagall was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with unshed tears. I was frightened, she admitted, not just about the broom, but about losing you. To Sirius Black, if he proves innocent. To your real family, your blood family. To the knowledge that you deserved better than an old spinster professor who had no idea how to raise a child. Mum, Harry said softly, moving to kneel beside her chair. You saved my life. You gave me a childhood full of love and learning and safety. You stood between me and every danger, taught me everything I know about being brave and kind and good. How could I possibly deserve better than that? McGonagall reached out with trembling fingers to touch his face. Oh, Mo Grathd, I've missed you so much. "I've missed you too," Harry said, leaning into her touch. Can I come home?" "You never left," McGonagall said, pulling him into her arms. "This is your home. I am your home. Always." June 6th, 1994. The Shrieking Shack. The truth about Sirius Black came out in a rush of revelations that left Harry's head spinning. Peter Pettigrew, alive and cowering in the corner. Sirius Black, gaunt and desperate, but radiating innocence. Professor Lupin, transforming under the full moon and stalking through the night as a werewolf. But what Harry remembered most clearly was the moment when Sirius turned to McGonagall, still weak from his escape and years in Azkaban, and said quietly, "Thank you." "For what?" McGonagall asked, her wand still trained on Pettigrew. "For raising him," Sirius said simply, looking at Harry with eyes that held a mixture of love and loss. "For giving him what James and Lily would have wanted him to have. For being his mother when I couldn't be his father." McGonagall's expression softened slightly. "He's a remarkable young man. His parents would be proud." "As are you, I hope," Sirius said, "because you did something I never could have. You made him whole." Later, after the time-turner adventure that saved both Sirius and Buckbeak, after the explanations and the goodbyes, Harry sat with McGonagall in her quarters and tried to process everything that had happened. "He wants me to live with him," Harry said quietly, "when his name is cleared. Sirius, I mean. He says he's my godfather, that my parents wanted him to take care of me if anything happened to them." McGonagall felt her heart stop. "And what do you want?" "I want him to be part of my life," Harry said honestly. "He knew my parents. He can tell me stories about them that no one else knows. He's family." "Yes," McGonagall said carefully. "He is. And you're my mother. This is my home. I want Sirius to visit, to write letters, to be my godfather and my friend. But I don't want to leave you." McGonagall felt relief flood through her so intensely it was almost painful. "You're sure?" "Completely sure," Harry said firmly. "Sirius understands. He said he'd rather have me happy and loved with you than miserable and conflicted with him. He called you the best mother he'd ever seen, and said he was honored to be Uncle Padfoot." "Uncle Padfoot?" Harry grinned. "It's a long story involving illegal animagus transformations and schoolboy pranks. I'll tell you later." McGonagall smiled, the first real smile she'd worn in months. "I look forward to it." As they sat together by the fire, watching the flames dance in the grate, McGonagall reflected on how much had changed over the year. Harry was growing up, testing boundaries, asserting his independence. But their bond had proven strong enough to weather adolescent storms and family revelations alike. "Mum?" Harry said sleepily, leaning against her shoulder. "Yes, love. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I was awful to you." "Thank you for coming home," McGonagall replied, pressing a kiss to his unruly hair, "even when you had other options." Outside the window, Hogwarts Castle settled into peaceful sleep. Inside, a mother and son sat together in the comfort of unshakable love, stronger for having weathered the storms that had tested but not broken their bond. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new tests of courage and loyalty. But whatever came, they would face it together, as they always had, as they always would. After all, they were family, and family, McGonagall knew, was the strongest magic of all. August 25th, 1994, Quidditch World Cup. McGonagall had never enjoyed Quidditch matches more than when she watched them with her extended family. They sat in the top box, herself, Harry, Sirius, under Polyjuice Potion as a distant Weasley cousin, Ron and Hermione, cheering for Bulgaria while good-naturedly arguing tactics with Mr. Weasley and his sons. Harry was animated in a way she rarely saw him in public, comfortable enough with his chosen family to let his guard down completely. Crum's Wronski feint was perfect, Harry was explaining to Hermione, who listened with the same intensity she brought to ancient runes. See how he pulled up at exactly the right moment. Any later, and he'd have hit the ground. Any earlier, and Lynch would have seen through it. The boy knows his Quidditch, Sirius said proudly, ruffling Harry's hair in a gesture that had become natural over the past year of visits and letters. James would have been over the moon to see him play Seeker. James would have been insufferable, McGonagall corrected fondly, bragging to anyone who'd listen about his son's flying skills. Speaking of insufferable, Ron muttered, pointing to Lucius Malfoy's approach to their box. Look who's coming to ruin our evening. But the match ended before any unpleasantness could develop, and they made their way back to their tent in the best of spirits. McGonagall was just settling Harry and Hermione with hot chocolate, while Ron and Sirius debated the finer points of keeper strategy. When the screaming started, "What?" Harry began. But McGonagall was already moving, her wand in her hand and her expression grim. "Death Eaters," she said shortly, looking out at the chaos erupting throughout the campground. Masked figures were terrorizing Muggle families, levitating them in the air like grotesque puppets. "We need to help," Harry said, immediately, reaching for his own wand. "We need to keep you safe," McGonagall corrected firmly. "Sirius, can you get the children to the Portkey site?" "I'm not leaving you," Harry said flatly. "And I'm not leaving either of you," Sirius added. "We stick together." Before McGonagall could argue, a cold laugh cut through the night air. High above the campground, glowing green against the dark sky, the dark-marked skull and serpent writhed in the clouds. McGonagall felt her blood turn to ice. She hadn't seen that symbol in 13 years, but her body remembered the terror it had once inspired. "Everyone stay close," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "We move together, we stay together, and we get out of here. Now." The journey to safety was a nightmare of running figures, screaming children, and the constant threat of Death Eater attacks. But they made it to the Portkey site unharmed, and as they tumbled into the Burrows kitchen an hour later, McGonagall finally allowed herself to breathe. "The dark mark," she said quietly to Sirius as they watched Harry help Mrs. Weasley calm a hysterical Ginny. "Someone cast the dark mark tonight." "Could mean nothing," Sirius said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Could have been anyone with a grudge, but I don't think it was. October 31st, 1994, Great Hall, Harry Potter." The goblet of fire spat out Harry's name on a slip of parchment, and McGonagall felt the world tilt around her. This couldn't be happening. Harry was 14 years old. He was too young to compete, too young to have entered, too young to survive the Triwizard Tournament, if the last century of casualties was any indication. "He didn't put his name in," she said immediately, as angry voices rose around the hall. Harry didn't enter his name in the goblet. Nevertheless, Dumbledore said quietly, "The goblet has chosen him as a fourth champion. The magical contract is binding." McGonagall rose from her seat so quickly her chair fell backward. "Binding? You're telling me that my 14-year-old son is magically bound to compete in a tournament designed to test adult wizards, and there's nothing we can do to stop it?" "The goblet's magic is ancient and powerful," Dumbledore replied. "To break the contract would be to forfeit Harry's magic permanently, if not his life." "Then how did his name get in the goblet?" Sirius demanded, having appeared at McGonagall's side the moment Harry's name was called. "He's underage. The age line should have prevented it. Someone else entered his name." McGonagall said grimly, pieces clicking into place. Someone with enough magical skill to fool an ancient magical artifact, and enough motivation to want Harry in mortal danger. The investigation will have to wait, Dumbledore said firmly. The other schools are expecting the tournament to proceed. McGonagall fixed him with a stare that could have melted steel. You will not sacrifice my son on the altar of your greater good, Albus. Not this time. Minerva. Harry will compete because he has no choice, McGonagall continued, her Scottish accent thick with fury. But he will compete with every advantage I can give him. He will have the best training, the best preparation, and the best support team in the history of this tournament. And if anyone tries to sabotage him or use this situation to put him in additional danger, they will answer to me. The threat hung in the air like a physical thing, and even Dumbledore stepped back slightly. Together, Harry said quietly from beside her, his young face set with determination. Whatever this is, whatever's happening, we face it together. Together, McGonagall agreed, putting her hand on his shoulder. Always. 1994 Dragon Task. Remember, McGonagall said quietly as Harry prepared for his face-off with the Hungarian Horntail. You're not trying to fight it. You're trying to outsmart it. Use your speed, use your flying skills, but most importantly, use your head. I know, Mum, Harry said, checking his wand one more time. Distract the dragon, grab the egg, get out alive. In that order, Sirius added with forced lightness. We're rather attached to you breathing. Harry managed a weak smile, then walked into the arena to face a creature that could incinerate him with a single breath. McGonagall watched through her fingers as Harry executed a perfect tactical approach. Summoning his firebolt, using his superior maneuverability to stay out of the dragon's range while gradually working his way toward the golden egg. When he finally grabbed it and flew clear, her legs nearly gave out with relief. Fastest completion time so far, Sirius said proudly as Harry landed safely outside the arena. And the only champion to complete the task without taking a direct hit. He flew like James, McGonagall said softly, tears of pride and terror streaming down her face. Reckless and brilliant and absolutely fearless. He flew like himself, Sirius corrected gently. Like the young man you raised him to be. February 24th, 1995, Lake Task. The second task was worse than the first, because McGonagall couldn't see what was happening. Harry had been underwater for over an hour, far longer than the other champions, and McGonagall was pacing the dock like a caged wildcat. Sirius stood beside her, equally tense, while Dumbledore watched the lake with his usual infuriating calm. He should be back by now, McGonagall muttered. The task was supposed to last an hour. What if something's gone wrong? What if he's trapped down there? He's fine, Sirius said, though his voice was tight with worry. Harry's resourceful. He'll find a way. When Harry finally broke the surface of the lake, gasping, exhausted, and towing both Gabrielle Delacour and Ron Weasley, McGonagall nearly collapsed with relief. You were supposed to take Ron and leave Gabrielle for Fleur, she scolded, as she wrapped him in warming charms and dry robes. Not rescue everyone yourself. Couldn't leave her, Harry said through chattering teeth. She was just a little girl, and Fleur wasn't coming. What if no one came for her? That's my boy, Sirius said proudly. Never could leave anyone behind. Your boy is going to give me a heart attack, McGonagall muttered, but her voice was warm with love. December 25th, 1994. Yule Ball. I still can't believe you taught him to dance, Sirius said, watching Harry lead Parvati Patil through a perfectly executed waltz. Every gentleman should know how to dance, McGonagall replied, though she couldn't keep the pride from her voice. I started teaching him when he was 8. He has excellent natural rhythm and excellent dress sense, apparently. Sirius nodded toward Harry's impeccably fitted dress robes. Though I suspect that's your influence as well. A mother's job is to ensure her son knows how to conduct himself in society, McGonagall said primly, then smiled. Even if that society includes international magical tournaments and formal balls. They watched Harry navigate the complex social dynamics of the evening with grace and kindness, dancing with several partners, making conversation with the visiting students, and generally representing himself, and them, beautifully. Lillian James would have been so proud, Sirius said quietly. I hope so, McGonagall replied. I've tried my best to raise him as they would have wanted. You've done more than that, Sirius said firmly. You've given him something they never could have. The knowledge that he's loved for who he is, not what he represents. June 24th, 1995. Third task asterisk. McGonagall had a sick feeling in her stomach as she watched Harry enter the maze for the third task. Something was wrong, had been wrong all year, and every instinct she possessed was screaming danger. He'll be fine, Sirius said beside her, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the armrest of his chair. Harry knows mazes. You've been teaching him tactical thinking since he was small. It's not the maze I'm worried about, McGonagall said grimly. It's whatever's waiting for him at the center. They watched the hedges swallow the 4 champions, and then there was nothing to do but wait and wait and wait. When the flash of light erupted from the center of the maze, green and terrible and wrong, McGonagall was on her feet before conscious thought kicked in. That wasn't part of the task, she said, her voice sharp with alarm. That was, someone just cast the killing curse in that maze. They were already running toward the maze entrance when Harry reappeared at the center, clutching the Triwizard Cup and sobbing over Cedric Diggory's still form. June 24th, 1995. Hospital wing. McGonagall held Harry while he told them what had happened in the graveyard. Voldemort's return, the ritual with his blood, the duel, Cedric's murder. His voice was hollow with trauma, but he recounted every detail with the precision she had taught him. He's back, Harry said quietly, his head resting against her shoulder. Voldemort's back, and he's stronger than ever. And it's my fault. My blood brought him back. No, McGonagall said fiercely. None of this is your fault. You were kidnapped, used against your will, forced to witness murder. The only person responsible for Voldemort's return is Voldemort himself. But if I hadn't touched the cup, Cedric would still be dead, and Voldemort would still be back, Sirius said grimly. But you would be dead too, and we'd never know what had happened. The war has returned, Dumbledore said quietly from the foot of the hospital bed. We must prepare for what's coming. We've been preparing, McGonagall said sharply. We've been preparing since Halloween of his first year, when you tried to use him as bait for the Philosopher's Stone. The difference is that now we know what we're preparing for. Minerva, Harry is not your weapon, McGonagall continued, her voice deadly quiet. He's my son, and I will protect him from Voldemort, from you, from the Ministry, and from anyone else who thinks they can use him for their own purposes. I understand, Dumbledore said carefully. But Harry's role in the coming war will be whatever Harry chooses it to be, McGonagall interrupted, when he's old enough to make that choice. Until then, he's a child who has been traumatized and needs time to heal. Harry looked up at her with gratitude and exhaustion in his green eyes. What happens now? Now we go home, McGonagall said simply. We take care of each other, we grieve for Cedric, and we prepare for whatever comes next. Together. June 30th, 1995, end-of-year feast. The Great Hall was subdued as Dumbledore spoke about Cedric Diggory's murder and Voldemort's return. Many students looked skeptical. The Ministry's propaganda campaign was already in full swing, painting Harry as an attention-seeking liar. But when Dumbledore called Harry forward to speak, the hall fell silent. "Cedric Diggory was murdered by Voldemort," Harry said, his young voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "I saw it happen. I watched him die because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, because someone wanted to use me to bring Voldemort back." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some sympathetic, some doubtful, some openly hostile. "I know some of you don't believe me. I know it's easier to think I'm lying than to accept that you-know-who has returned. But believing lies doesn't make them true, and ignoring danger doesn't make it go away." Harry's voice grew stronger, more confident. "Cedric died because of hatred, because someone thought Muggle-borns were less worthy of life than pure bloods, because someone believed that power mattered more than kindness." McGonagall felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched her son stand before his peers with the courage and wisdom she had tried so hard to instill in him. "But we don't have to let hatred win," Harry continued. "We can choose to stand together. We can choose to protect each other regardless of blood status, or house loyalty, or nationality. We can choose to remember that what makes us human isn't our magic, it's our capacity to love." The applause that followed was scattered at first, then growing stronger as students throughout the hall began to stand. By the time Harry returned to his seat, the entire Gryffindor table was on its feet, followed by most of Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw, and even a few brave Slytherins. "That was perfect," McGonagall whispered as Harry sat beside her, his face flushed with nervous exhaustion. "You think so?" "I know so," she said firmly. "Your parents would have been so proud. Sirius and I are so proud," where Harry asked quietly, "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." McGonagall looked across the hall at Sirius, who nodded slightly, then down at her son, brave, kind, traumatized but not broken, and felt her heart swell with fierce love. "We're going to be better than all right," she said softly. "We're going to be a family, the three of us, plus Ron and Hermione and anyone else who wants to stand with us. And family doesn't abandon each other, no matter how dark things get." July 31st, 1995. Harry's 15th birthday. Harry woke on his 15th birthday in his bed at Hogwarts, surrounded by the people he loved most in the world. McGonagall sat in her chair by the fire, grading summer reading assignments with her usual precision. Sirius sprawled in the other armchair, reading the Daily Prophet and muttering unflattering comments about ministry incompetence. Ron and Hermione occupied the sofa, arguing quietly about the proper pronunciation of a Latin incantation. "Happy birthday, Mograft," McGonagall said softly as Harry stretched and yawned. "Thank you, Mum," Harry replied, settling back against his pillows with a contentment that had been hard-won. "This is perfect." And it was. They had survived Voldemort's return, Cedric's death, and the Ministry's attempts to discredit Harry's story. They had emerged stronger, closer, more united than ever. There would be more battles ahead. McGonagall knew that with certainty. Voldemort would not be content to remain in the shadows forever, and when he struck, he would target Harry with everything he possessed. But let him come. Harry Potter was no longer the isolated, vulnerable boy that Voldemort expected. He was a young man trained by the best, protected by powerful magic, surrounded by people who loved him unconditionally. and backed by a mother who would burn the world down before she let anyone hurt her son. "What are you thinking about?" Harry asked, noticing her expression. "The future," McGonagall said honestly, "and how proud I am of the man you're becoming." "What kind of man am I becoming?" McGonagall looked at her son, brave enough to face dragons, kind enough to rescue strangers, strong enough to speak truth in the face of disbelief, and wise enough to understand that love was the most powerful magic of all. "The kind of man who stands up for what's right," she said simply. "The kind who protects those who cannot protect themselves. The kind who chooses love over hatred, courage over comfort, and truth over convenience." She reached out to touch his cheek. "The kind of man your parents dreamed you would become." Harry smiled, the brilliant, unguarded smile that had captured her heart 14 years ago and had never let it go. "Then I think," he said quietly, "that we're going to be just fine." Outside the window, dawn was breaking over Hogwarts Castle, painting the ancient stones gold and rose. Inside, a family sat together in the perfect peace of unshakable love, ready to face whatever darkness the future might hold. After all, they had each other. And that, McGonagall knew with absolute certainty, was enough to conquer anything. Even the Dark Lord himself couldn't stand against the power of a family united by choice, strengthened by trial, and bound by love that had proven stronger than death itself.